Take a deep breath and just think about how powerful your sense of smell really is. One unexpected scent on the breeze can instantly pull you from the present moment, hurling you back through years, even decades, to a specific memory you hadn't thought of in ages. It's a kind of magic we've all felt, a direct line to the past. Now, imagine using that same incredible power not just to revisit your own childhood, but to step directly into the bustling streets of ancient Rome. What if you could smell the world as a Roman citizen did? The rich, earthy aroma of olive oil being pressed, the sharp tang of sun-warmed stone, the delicate, intoxicating perfume of exotic flowers carried by a noblewoman as she passes. This isn't just a fantasy. For the ancient Romans, scent was more than a passing pleasure. It was a sophisticated language, a status symbol, and a deeply personal art form that wove itself into every aspect of their daily lives, from their religious ceremonies to their most intimate social rituals. Today, we are going to unlock one of history's most captivating mysteries, the lost art of Roman perfumery. This was a world far beyond simple fragrances. It was a world of master craftsmen known as unguentarii, who blended precious oils and rare botanicals with the precision of alchemists. They created scents that told stories of power, wealth, and empire, using ingredients gathered from the farthest reaches of the known world. The very air of Rome was layered with these complex aromas, each one a carefully crafted statement. But how did they do it? What secrets did their formulas hold? And what can these ancient blends tell us about the people who cherished them? This is a journey into a sensory archaeology, where we don't just read about history, we attempt to breathe it in. So, prepare to follow your nose on an adventure 2,000 years into the past. We're going to explore the sophisticated and surprisingly nuanced world of Roman scented oil blending, piecing together the practices of these ancient artisans from historical texts, archaeological finds, and surviving recipes. We'll uncover what their favorite scents were, why they valued them, and how you can even begin to understand the principles they used. This is more than a history lesson. It's a chance to connect with the past on a truly human level, through a sense we all share. Get ready to discover how the Romans turned fragrance into an art, and how, by understanding their scents, we can come to understand a vital, vibrant part of their world that has, until now, been almost completely invisible. To truly grasp the importance of scented oils in Rome, you first have to set aside our modern idea of perfume as a simple accessory or a pleasant luxury. For a Roman, scent was a constant and powerful social signal, a visible or rather invisible badge of identity and rank that permeated every layer of existence. From the moment a wealthy patrician began his day, scent was involved. After his bath, his body would be meticulously anointed with oils, a process that was as much about hygiene as it was about social presentation. The specific fragrance he chose wasn't arbitrary. It was a deliberate statement. Using a common, cheaply available scent like simple lavender or myrtle would mark you as a commoner, perhaps a merchant or a freedman. But if you could anoint yourself with a complex, imported blend featuring rare ingredients like spikenard from the Himalayas or the famed rose of Paestum, you were broadcasting your wealth, your worldliness, and your access to the farthest corners of the empire without uttering a single word. This olfactory language extended powerfully into the public sphere, particularly at the grand banquets that were central to political and social life. A host wasn't just judged by the quality of the food and wine, but by the very atmosphere of his home. The most desirable guests would arrive already perfumed, and the dining rooms themselves would be suffused with fragrance. Servants might sprinkle saffron-infused water on the floors, so that as people walked, the warmth of their feet would release the precious, spicy aroma into the air. Garlands of fresh flowers and herbs adorned the space, and sometimes even the doves that fluttered around the room had their wings touched with scented oils, creating a living, moving source of perfume. To attend such an event was to be immersed in a multi-sensory display of the host's power and refinement. Your nose would tell you, long before your eyes confirmed it, that you were in the presence of someone of immense importance. But the role of scent reached far beyond the secular and into the sacred. In Roman religion, the gods were thought to be pleased by pleasant odors. Scented oils were not merely symbolic offerings. They were a fundamental medium of communication with the divine. Ritual purification before a ceremony often involved anointing with specific oils, and libations of wine and perfumed oil were poured onto altars. The smoke from incense, often made from frankincense and myrrh imported at great cost from Arabia, was believed to carry prayers directly to the heavens. A state-sponsored sacrifice that skimped on the quality of its aromatics would have been seen as an insult to the gods, potentially jeopardizing the safety and favor of the entire state. Therefore, the most expensive and exotic scents were a necessary public expense, linking personal piety and political spectacle in a cloud of fragrant smoke. Even in the most personal and poignant moments of life, scent had a role. At funerals, the body of the deceased was anointed with oils, both for preservation and as a final, respectful offering. The type of oil used could indicate the family's status. A lavish funeral procession for a prominent citizen would have been preceded by the unmistakable scent of costly spices, a public affirmation of the family's dignity and standing, even in their grief. This demonstrates the profound depth of sense integration. It was present at birth, throughout the daily rituals of life, in the highest religious ceremonies, and at the final farewell. It was a thread woven into the very fabric of what it meant to be Roman. A silent, persistent, and eloquent testament to a person's place in the world. So what exactly did this sophisticated Roman nose want to smell? If we could step into an unguentarius's shop, what aromatic profile would we find most desirable? The answer might actually surprise our modern sensibilities. Where we today often favor light, fresh, or subtly sweet perfumes, the Roman ideal leaned toward the powerful, the complex, and the profoundly earthy. They cherished boldness and longevity above all else. A scent wasn't meant to be a faint whisper. It was a declaration, a persistent aura that announced your presence long after you had entered a room, and lingered in the space long after you had departed. This preference for intensity speaks volumes about their world, a world without modern sanitation, where strong personal fragrances also served a practical purpose in masking the less pleasant background odors of a crowded, bustling city. Their palette of prized ingredients reads like a treasure map of the empire. At the heart of countless blends was the rose, but not the delicate, dewy rose we might picture. The Roman rose, particularly the celebrated variety from Paestum, was a deeper, richer, almost spicy fragrance. They didn't just use the petals, they employed the entire plant, creating rose-infused wines, rose vinegars, and most importantly, rose oil, which formed the base for countless unguents. This wasn't a timid floral note. It was a robust, voluptuous scent associated with Venus, the goddess of love, and with lavish luxury. Similarly, saffron was a superstar of Roman perfumery. Valued for its vibrant golden yellow color as much as its scent, saffron offered a complex aroma, part honey, part hay, with a bitter, medicinal edge. They used it to scent theaters, courtyards, and banquet halls, believing its aroma could elevate the spirit and create an atmosphere of opulent celebration. To smell saffron was to know you were in a place of wealth and importance. Then we have the resins, the holy trinity of ancient perfumery: frankincense, myrrh, and labdanum. These were the deep, smoky, balsamic foundations of so many sacred and secular scents. Myrrh, with its bitter, medicinal, and slightly sweet character, was particularly beloved. It was considered solemn and dignified, making it a staple in funeral rites. But it was also woven into everyday luxury blends for its intriguing complexity. And for the ultimate statement of exotic wealth, nothing could surpass spikenard. This oil, extracted from a Himalayan plant, was astronomically expensive, transported over thousands of miles along treacherous trade routes. Its scent is difficult to describe: earthy, musky, woody, and deeply animalic. It was the signature scent of the elite, a fragrant proof that one had the resources to bring the very ends of the earth to their skin. Using spikenard was like wearing a piece of distant, mysterious geography. This collective preference for roses that smelled like gardens, not bouquets, for saffron with its medicinal punch, and for the dark, resinous depth of myrrh and spikenard, paints a clear picture of the Roman aesthetic. They were not seeking to imitate a simple, natural flower. They were aiming for an idealized, enhanced version of nature, a fragrance that was more potent, more lasting, and more complex than anything found in the wild. Their love for these layered, heavy aromas reflects a culture that valued substance, impact, and tangible demonstrations of power. A Roman's favorite scent wasn't just a matter of personal taste. It was a direct reflection of their place in a vast, interconnected world. A world they wanted to carry with them, bottled and ready to anoint, in every drop of precious oil. Behind the creation of these powerful and symbolic scents stood a fascinating and highly specialized class of artisan, the unguentarii. These were the master perfumers of Rome, and to think of them as simple shopkeepers would be a profound mistake. They were a unique blend of chemist, botanist, and artist, operating in a world where the line between science and magic was often blurred. Their workshops, typically located in specific districts known for the trade, were aromatic laboratories filled with an array of exotic ingredients. Jars of oil from Libya and Egypt, bundles of fragrant herbs from local gardens, and precious gums and spices from the farthest reaches of the caravan routes would all be meticulously organized, waiting for the unguentarius's skilled hand. The air in these spaces would have been thick, almost dizzying, with a cacophony of competing scents, a testament to the global economy that fueled their craft. The path to becoming a master unguentarius was arduous and almost always restricted to a system of apprenticeship. A young boy, often the son of a perfumer or from a family connected to the trade, would enter a master's workshop as a disciple. His training was a long, gradual process of osmosis. He wouldn't be handed a book of formulas on his first day. Instead, he would start with the most menial tasks: cleaning pots, grinding common herbs, and learning to identify raw materials by sight, touch, and most importantly, by smell. This sensory education was paramount. He needed to be able to distinguish between different grades of myrrh, to know if a batch of rose petals had been harvested at the perfect moment, and to detect the slightest adulteration in a precious oil. His master's knowledge was a closely guarded treasure, passed down not through written texts, but through lived experience, whispered secrets, and years of direct observation. This was a craft learned with the hands and the nose, a sensory legacy built over a lifetime. The secretive nature of their work cannot be overstated. In an age without patents or intellectual property law as we know it, a perfumer's unique formula was his greatest asset, the very source of his livelihood and reputation. A successful blend, one that became the favorite of a wealthy patrician, or was commissioned for a state religious ceremony, was a commercial gold mine. Consequently, recipes were protected with a level of zeal that would be familiar to any modern technology corporation guarding its proprietary code. Key ingredients might be referred to by coded names. The precise sequence of steps in a maceration or enfleurage process would be a family secret. An apprentice might only be taught one part of a complex recipe, ensuring that no single person, other than the master himself, held the complete knowledge. This culture of secrecy meant that the death of a great unguentarius could mean the permanent loss of legendary scents, their intricate compositions vanishing from the world as completely as if they had never existed. Socially, the unguentarii occupied a complex and somewhat ambiguous position. On one hand, they were respected for their skill and their connection to luxury and the elite. A perfumer who served a consul or an emperor's household could achieve significant fame and wealth. They were essential purveyors of the very symbols of status and power we discussed earlier. Yet, on the other hand, they were still tradespeople. Roman aristocracy held a deep-seated prejudice against those who worked with their hands for a living, no matter how sophisticated the craft. A senator might eagerly seek out the services of a brilliant unguentarius, lavishing him with payment, but he would never consider him a social equal. The unguentarius lived in this liminal space, a respected artisan central to the culture of luxury, yet forever marked by his profession. He was the invisible author of the aromatic language spoken by the upper classes, a crucial figure who wielded significant influence from the background of Roman society. To create those coveted scents, the Roman unguentarius relied upon a supply chain that was nothing short of a marvel of the ancient world. A sprawling global network that transformed the city of Rome into the aromatic heart of a vast empire. The ingredients for his art did not come from local Italian hillsides alone. They were gathered from the farthest, most fabled corners of the known world, each component carrying the scent of its distant homeland. This was a trade built on luxury, but it was powered by immense economic muscle and intricate political maneuvering. The very existence of a master perfumer's workshop in Rome was a direct result of the empire's ability to command, control, and protect the routes that brought these precious commodities from thousands of miles away. Let's trace the journey of just a few of these legendary ingredients. Picture a Roman merchant, or more likely a chain of merchants, handling a bundle of cinnamon bark. This warm, sweet spice, so central to many complex blends, began its life not in some nearby province, but on the distant island of Sri Lanka, which the Romans called Taprobane. The voyage was epic. From Sri Lanka, the cinnamon would be shipped across the Indian Ocean, likely reaching the ports of Egypt on the Red Sea after a treacherous journey subject to the whims of the monsoon winds. From there, it would be carried by camel caravans across the desert to the Nile, then shipped down the river to Alexandria, the great commercial hub of the Roman world. Only then could it finally be transported across the Mediterranean to the docks at Ostia and into the hungry markets of Rome. Every hand it passed through, every border it crossed, added to its cost, making it a substance worth many times its weight in silver. To possess and use cinnamon was to display not just wealth, but a connection to geography so remote it bordered on myth. Then consider the sacred resins, frankincense and myrrh. These were the lifeblood of Roman religion and high-status perfumery, and their source was a tightly controlled secret of southern Arabia, a region the Romans called Arabia Felix, or Fortunate Arabia. The trees that wept these valuable gums grew in a very narrow, harsh stretch of land in what is now Oman and Yemen. Harvesting the resin was a specialized skill, but controlling its export was a source of immense power for the Arabian tribes who acted as middlemen. The famed incense route was a web of caravan trails that snaked northward up the Arabian Peninsula, avoiding the empty expanse of the desert, to reach the trading cities of the Nabateans, like Petra. From there, the goods would move into the Roman sphere. The Roman demand for these aromatics was so insatiable that it funded entire kingdoms in the desert. And historians like Pliny the Elder lamented the vast fortunes in Roman gold and silver that flowed out of the empire every year to pay for them. This was a trade deficit on an imperial scale, all for the sake of sacred smoke and personal fragrance. Even an ingredient we might think of as more local, like rose oil, often had an international dimension. While roses were certainly grown in Italy, the most prized rose oil, renowned for its intensity and quality, came from Egypt. The city of Alexandria was not just a transit point for Eastern goods. It was a major center of perfume production in its own right. Egyptian perfumers had long been masters of their craft, and their rose oils were considered exceptionally fine. Vast fields of roses cultivated in the Nile Delta were harvested to produce this precious substance, which was then exported across the Mediterranean. This meant that even a scent with a distinctly Roman character, the voluptuous rose, was frequently an imported luxury, a product of Egypt's fertile land and specialized knowledge. Choosing an Egyptian rose oil over a local one was another subtle marker of discernment and access. The political implications of this aromatic trade were profound. The Roman state had a direct and powerful interest in securing these routes. Military campaigns were not just about conquering territory for glory. They were also about gaining control over lucrative trade networks. The annexation of Egypt under Augustus was a strategic masterstroke that gave Rome direct access to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean trade. The Roman navy actively patrolled the Mediterranean to suppress piracy, not merely for the safety of grain ships, but to ensure the steady flow of luxury goods that the elite demanded. To disrupt the flow of frankincense or cinnamon would be to disrupt the very rituals of state religion and the social displays that underpinned the power of the ruling class. The reach of a Roman perfume, therefore, was not just a sensory experience. It was the end product of an immense, empire-wide system of commerce, logistics, and military power, all distilled into a single, precious drop of oil. And so we arrive at the very heart of the mystery, the cryptic instructions left behind by the unguentarii themselves. While the grand workshops of Rome are long gone, a precious handful of textual clues have survived the ravages of time, offering us a tantalizing, if fragmented, window into their practice. The most significant of these is a work not solely dedicated to perfume, but a sprawling encyclopedia of Roman life, The Natural History by Pliny the Elder. Within its vast pages, Pliny describes various recipes and methods, but he does so as an observer, not a practicing perfumer. His goal was to catalogue the natural world, not to provide a practical manual for future artisans. This creates our first major challenge. His descriptions can be wonderfully detailed, yet they often lack the precise, step-by-step clarity a modern perfumer would need to faithfully recreate a scent. He might tell us that a certain flower is best harvested at dawn, or that a resin should be of the finest quality from a specific region. But the exact proportions, the temperature of the oil, the duration of infusion, these critical details are frequently glossed over or omitted entirely. Another invaluable source comes from a figure deeply connected to the material world, the physician. A Greek doctor named Dioscorides, who served in the Roman army, wrote a seminal text called De Materia Medica, a comprehensive guide to the medicinal uses of plants, minerals, and animals. Since the lines between pharmacy, cooking, and perfumery were incredibly blurry in the ancient world, his work is filled with entries that double as perfume recipes. For instance, he provides a method for creating a scented oil called rhododendron, which uses rose petals, but the instructions are embedded within a discussion of the plant's cooling and astringent properties. These sources are invaluable, but they remind us that the primary purpose of many of these scented preparations was not merely to smell pleasant. They were often considered therapeutic, meant to balance the body's humors or ward off illness. Interpreting them requires us to think like a Roman healer, not just a modern fragrance enthusiast. Perhaps the most frustrating and fascinating aspect of these ancient texts is their system of measurement. A Roman recipe might call for a sextarius of oil, a libra of myrrh, or a cyathus of wine. While we can convert these Roman units into modern equivalents, a sextarius is roughly a pint, a libra is a pound. This mathematical translation only gets us so far. The real difficulty lies in the inherent ambiguity. When a recipe instructs to add 1 part of spikenard to 10 parts of oil, what exactly constitutes a part? Is it by weight or by volume? And even if we settle on one, the quality and potency of the raw materials themselves were anything but standardized. The libra of myrrh used by one unguentarii in Pompeii could have been significantly more or less aromatic than the libra used by another in Rome, depending on the harvest, the age of the resin, and the skill of the merchant who supplied it. This variability means that even with a seemingly clear formula, 2 modern attempts at reconstruction could yield wildly different results. Then there is the puzzle of the ingredients themselves. Some names are clear and triumphant to decipher. We know that rosa is the rose, crocus is saffron, and nardus is spikenard, but other terms are shrouded in confusion. The word amaracus, for example, appears frequently in recipes. Is it marjoram? Is it a type of basil? Or is it a plant that has since gone extinct or changed its common name over 2 millennia? Scholars cross-reference descriptions from multiple ancient authors, study archaeological remains of seeds and pollen, and even look at linguistic roots, yet some identities remain stubbornly uncertain. Compounding this is the issue of substitution. We know that the most expensive recipes called for genuine Indian spikenard, but we also have evidence that less scrupulous or less affluent perfumers would use a similar smelling, locally available root like valerian to mimic its earthy, musky character. So when we read nard in a text, we cannot always be sure if we are looking at the premier ingredient or a clever, cheaper imitation. This combination of vague measurements and ambiguous ingredients creates an intoxicating air of mystery around these ancient formulas. They are not like a modern cookbook where you can confidently gather your materials and expect a predictable outcome. Instead, they are more like ancient maps, where the coastlines are clearly drawn, but the interior is labeled, "Here be dragons." They give us a framework, a general direction, but filling in the details requires a blend of historical scholarship, scientific analysis, and a healthy dose of informed intuition. This is where the field of experimental archaeology comes into play. Modern historians and artisan perfumers are now collaborating, taking these fragmentary instructions and attempting to bring them back to life. They will prepare multiple versions of the same recipe, testing different interpretations of amaracus, or varying the infusion times, then compare the results, not just by smell, but by analyzing the chemical residues found in actual Roman perfume bottles excavated from sites like Pompeii. It is a slow, meticulous process of trial and error. A dialogue across centuries where the success of a reconstruction is measured by how closely its chemical signature matches a 2,000-year-old sample. Of all the ingredients that filled the bustling workshops of the unguentarii, one flower reigned supreme, capturing the Roman imagination and dominating their aromatic world like no other: the rose. To call it a popular scent would be a vast understatement. The rose was nothing less than an obsession, a cultural phenomenon woven into the very fabric of their identity. Its significance went far beyond a simple preference for a pleasant floral note. For the Romans, the rose embodied a complex tapestry of meanings, representing everything from divine love and martial victory to the fleeting nature of life itself. This deep, multifaceted symbolism fueled a demand so immense that it spurred agricultural innovations we would recognize today, turning rose cultivation into a major commercial enterprise and elevating its scent to the undisputed queen of Roman perfumery. The sheer scale of their devotion becomes clear when we look at the extravagant festivals dedicated to this single bloom. The most famous of these was the Rosalia, a sprawling spring festival where public spaces, military standards, and even graves were decorated with vast quantities of rose garlands. This was not a subtle affair. The goal was to overwhelm the senses, to create a world temporarily submerged in roses. Imagine entire streets carpeted with petals, the air so thick with their perfume that it became a tangible presence. This public spectacle was mirrored in private extravagance. The historian Suetonius recounts a notorious tale about the Emperor Nero, who once spent the equivalent of a modern fortune on a single banquet. At the climax of the evening, the ceiling panels of the dining room were suddenly hinged open, releasing a veritable avalanche of rose petals upon his guests. The quantity was so immense that one of the attendees was actually smothered to death, a chillingly literal example of being buried in luxury. This story, while extreme, highlights a crucial Roman ideal. Abundance was power, and no symbol represented lavish abundance better than the rose. To satisfy this voracious demand, Roman agriculturists had to become pioneers of large-scale flower farming. They developed sophisticated cultivation techniques that transformed parts of Italy into a sea of blossoms each spring. The most celebrated roses came from the city of Paestum, located south of Naples, which became synonymous with the highest quality blooms. Paestum's roses were reputed to flower not once, but twice a year, a marvel of nature that the growers there likely encouraged through careful pruning and irrigation methods. They understood the importance of terroir long before the wine industry coined the term, recognizing that the specific soil composition, sunlight, and coastal climate of the region produced roses with a uniquely intense and spicy fragrance, quite different from the softer scent of many modern varieties. Vast estates were dedicated to their production, creating a booming trade that shipped these prized petals, preserved in salt or already steeped in oil, to perfumers across the empire. This wasn't hobby gardening. It was an agro-industrial operation built on the back of a scent craze. But why this particular flower? Its dominance was rooted in a powerful combination of mythology and practicality. Mythologically, the rose was sacred to Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. It was said to have sprung from the ground where her tears mixed with the blood of her wounded lover, Adonis. This divine connection made rose scent an essential element of romantic and sensual pursuits. To anoint oneself with rose oil was to place oneself under the protection and influence of the goddess, to become an object of desire and affection. Yet the rose also held a darker, more philosophical meaning. Its beautiful blossoms wilted quickly, serving as a persistent memento mori, a reminder of death and the transient nature of all earthly pleasures. Romans would often display roses at feasts, not just for celebration, but to encourage guests to eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. This duality, representing both life's peak pleasures and its inevitable end, gave the rose a profound emotional resonance that a simpler scent could never achieve. For the perfumers, the rose was also a remarkably versatile and stable base note. Its robust fragrance held up well when blended with other powerful ingredients like saffron, myrrh, or spikenard, acting as a velvety floral canvas that could tame sharper aromas and add a layer of opulent sweetness. The Romans rarely sought the scent of a solitary rose in a garden. They were after something grander, the overwhelming, intoxicating aroma of an entire rose garden in full, riotous bloom. This desired intensity dictated their extraction methods. They wouldn't simply soak a few petals in oil. One common, though incredibly labor-intensive, technique was enfleurage. This involved laying thousands of fresh rose petals onto a layer of cold fat, often lard or tallow. The fat would absorb the flower's essential oils, and the spent petals would be replaced with fresh ones over and over, for days or even weeks, until the fat was supersaturated with the rose's essence. This perfumed fat could then be sold as a pomade or washed with alcohol to separate the fragrant absolute, creating a concentrate of breathtaking potency. The process was a testament to their commitment, a willingness to expend staggering amounts of raw material and labor for the sake of olfactory perfection. When a Roman citizen applied a rose-scented unguent, they weren't just wearing a fragrance. They were anointing themselves with the essence of myth, the fruit of agricultural genius, and the very symbol of their culture's most passionate contradictions. Of course, the master unguentarius knew that the most exotic spices and rarest flowers were only as good as the foundation they were built upon. The base oil was far from a neutral, inert ingredient. It was the very soul of the perfume, the medium that captured, preserved, and ultimately released the symphony of scents over time. Just as a painter carefully selects their canvas for its texture and absorbency, the Roman perfumer made a deliberate choice about which oil would form the heart of their creation. This decision was critical, influencing everything from the fragrance's lifespan on the skin to its initial aromatic impression, and even its perceived value. The most common and iconic base in the Roman world was, perhaps unsurprisingly, olive oil. This was the quintessential Italian oil, pressed from the groves that covered the hillsides of the peninsula. But the unguentarius didn't reach for just any olive oil from the kitchen. They sought out the highest grade, known as Oleum omphacinum. This was a unique, green-hued oil made from olives harvested while they were still unripe and bitter. The result was an oil with a much lighter, grassier, and less fruity scent of its own, which wouldn't compete with or overpower the delicate top notes of flowers like rose or lily. It was also less prone to turning rancid quickly, a vital consideration in an age without synthetic preservatives. Using a common, fully ripened olive oil would have given a perfume a distinctly culinary, salad-like undertone, marking it as a product of inferior quality. The choice of Oleum omphacinum was a clear signal of a perfumer's expertise and commitment to purity. But the Roman world was vast, and its tastes were diverse. For those seeking an even more refined and luxurious base, especially for the most expensive floral compositions, there was Oleum balaninum, or ben oil. This prized substance was pressed from the seeds of the moringa tree, which grew in the warmer eastern reaches of the empire, particularly in Egypt and parts of the Near East. Ben oil was a marvel of ancient chemistry. It is virtually odorless, providing a perfectly blank canvas that allowed the true character of the precious aromatics to shine through without any interference. More importantly, it has a remarkable resistance to oxidation, meaning perfumes made with it would remain fresh and potent for far longer than those based on olive oil. Think of the difference between a portrait painted on a rough, textured canvas that subtly shows through the paint, versus one on a perfectly smooth, primed panel that makes the colors appear brilliantly pure. Ben oil was that smooth panel. Its rarity and superior properties made it the base of choice for the most exclusive and long-lasting perfumes, the kind reserved for the imperial household or the altars of the most important state temples. Using Ben oil was a statement in itself, whispering of exotic origins and uncompromising quality. Another important player in the perfumer's workshop was almond oil. Pressed from sweet almonds, this oil offered a different profile altogether. It has a very subtle, slightly nutty, and gently sweet aroma that could beautifully complement certain types of blends, particularly those featuring warmer, spicier notes like saffron or cinnamon. While not as stable as Ben oil, it was lighter on the skin than olive oil, and was often favored for creating luxurious body oils and hair treatments that left a soft, pleasing scent. The choice between these bases wasn't just about chemistry. It was also about regional identity and resource availability. A perfumer working in a bustling shop in Rome might have access to all three, carefully selecting each for a specific commission. But a perfumer in Gaul or Hispania might rely almost exclusively on high-quality local olive oils, creating fragrances that had a distinctly regional character, a subtle terroir influenced by the very land they came from. This regional variation meant that a rose perfume made in Egypt with Ben oil would have a brighter, truer floral character, while the same recipe prepared in northern Italy with the finest local olive oil might have a richer, more earthy and complex depth. There was no single Roman perfume. There were provincial interpretations, all united by a common artistic language, but distinguished by their local ingredients. The process of infusing these base oils was just as crucial as the selection. The unguentarii couldn't simply toss dried flowers into a vat of oil and hope for the best. The most common and effective method was a slow, cold maceration. Fresh flower petals, fragrant herbs, or crushed spices would be fully submerged in the base oil inside a sealed ceramic vessel called a lagino. This vessel would then be left to sit in a cool, dark place for weeks or even months. Over this long period, the oil would slowly and gently draw out the essential fats and aromatic compounds from the plant material. This patient, passive extraction preserved the most delicate and volatile top notes of the fragrance that would be destroyed by heat. For more robust materials like roots, barks, or resins, a gentle heating process might be employed. The crushed ingredient would be simmered in the oil using a double boiler method, often in a bain-marie set over a low fire. The perfumer had to be incredibly skilled during this step. Too much heat would cook the oil and the aromatics, creating a burnt, unpleasant odor and accelerating spoilage. The goal was a warm infusion, just enough to help the oil penetrate the tough plant fibers and extract their deeper, richer scent molecules. Often, a master perfumer would use a combination of techniques, creating a base infusion with heat-extracted myrrh for depth, and then later layering in a cold macerated rose infusion for its brilliant, lifting floralcy. This artful blending of extraction methods allowed them to build perfumes with incredible complexity and a true sense of dimension, a scent that unfolded and revealed itself over time, much like a well-composed piece of music. But for all the ingredients we can confidently identify, there are others that remain stubbornly elusive, hiding in plain sight within ancient texts under names that no longer map to any known plant in our modern world. These are the ghost components of Roman perfumery, the mystery ingredients that add a layer of profound and tantalizing uncertainty to our understanding of their art. When a Roman author like Pliny or Dioscorides describes a substance called amaracus or panax, they do so with the assumption that their reader knows exactly what they're talking about. For them it was common knowledge. For us, it's a 2,000-year-old puzzle. The disappearance of these scents from the perfumer's palette isn't just a loss of a few aromatic notes. It represents a rupture in a continuous tradition of knowledge, a forgotten chapter in the story of smell that we are still struggling to reread. One of the most prominent of these enigmatic substances is aspalathes. This word appears repeatedly in Greek and Roman texts as a key ingredient in prestigious perfumes. Dioscorides describes it as a thorny shrub from North Africa, and he notes that its wood was used, not its flowers or leaves. When burned, it was said to produce a fragrance similar to the much prized carburation, which was itself a compounded perfume. Some modern scholars have proposed that aspalathes might be a species of broom, perhaps Genista acanthocloda, a spiny plant found in Mediterranean regions. Others have suggested it could be related to the rosewood family, which can yield beautifully scented timber. The problem is that without a definitive botanical description or an archaeological sample that can be chemically matched to a specific plant, we are left with educated guesses. The true scent of aspalathes, a scent that once defined luxury for a Roman noble, might be growing wild somewhere in Greece or Libya today, completely anonymous to us, its historical significance utterly forgotten. Then we have the case of metopion. This wasn't a plant, but rather a specific type of perfumed oil that originated from Egypt, and its name points to its own complex mystery. The most common theory is that metopion was oil infused with the resin of a plant called opipanax, which has a warm, balsamic, and slightly animalic scent. Yet, some recipes suggest metopion was itself a key ingredient in other, even more complex perfumes. This creates a Russian doll scenario, a perfume within a perfume. Was metopion a single, distinct ingredient? Or was it a proprietary Egyptian blend, a pre-made concentrate that Roman perfumers imported and used as a building block? The name itself adds to the confusion, as it might be derived from the Egyptian town of Metopia, implying a geographic origin that guaranteed a specific quality. The loss of metopion's true identity means we've lost not just a scent, but potentially an entire category of ancient perfume base, a foundational note that underpinned countless famous formulations. So why did these ingredients vanish? The reasons are as varied as the scents themselves. In some cases, the answer is brutally practical: over-harvesting. A plant like silphium, a relative of ferula, and a phenomenally popular seasoning and medicine in the ancient world, was driven to extinction by Roman demand. While we know it was used in cooking and medicine, it's highly plausible its distinct, pungent aroma was also captured in oils. We will never know what silphium smelled like. Its extinction represents a permanent silencing of one note in the ancient aromatic symphony. Other ingredients may have fallen out of favor due to shifting trade routes. Political instability or the rise and fall of empires could make a once accessible plant from a remote province suddenly unavailable. When the supply dried up, perfumers were forced to adapt, substituting a locally available herb for a forgotten import. And over generations, the original knowledge of that plant's aromatic use simply faded away. Another fascinating possibility is that the name of a plant survived, but the specific species it referred to changed over time, a phenomenon known as a drifting referent. The word nard is a perfect example. To a Roman in the 1st century, nard almost certainly meant Indian spikenard, but after the fall of Rome and the disruption of long-distance trade with India, later European perfumers and herbalists began applying the name nard to a similar-smelling European plant, spikenard, which is in the valerian family. So, a recipe from the 1500s that calls for nard is likely referring to a completely different plant than a Roman recipe using the same word. This linguistic drift creates a minefield for modern historians, as a name that appears consistent across millennia can mask a complete substitution of the underlying ingredient. The scent a medieval monk associated with nard would have been the earthy, rooty smell of valerian, a world apart from the musky, complex aroma of the Himalayan spikenard that Cleopatra or Nero would have known. This hunt for lost scents is more than just an academic exercise. It's a race against time to reconstruct a sensory universe. Modern scientists are now using advanced chemical analysis techniques like gas chromatography and mass spectrometry on the residues found in the bottoms of Roman perfume bottles excavated from sites like Pompeii and Herculaneum. They can identify the chemical fingerprints of known substances like pine, iris, or almond oil. But sometimes they find mysterious chemical compounds that don't match any known essential oil in our modern databases. These unidentified peaks on a chromatogram could be the ghostly signatures of Aspalathes, Metopion, or another completely lost plant. They are the molecular echoes of scents we can no longer name, reminding us that our understanding of the Roman olfactory world is, and may always be, incomplete. These gaps in our knowledge are not failures. They are invitations to wonder, to imagine the vast and rich tapestry of smells that history has, for now, kept secret. Now that we've gathered our precious ingredients and selected the perfect base oil, we arrive at the most transformative stage of all, the sacred ritual of the blend itself. This was not a haphazard mixing of components. It was a careful, almost ceremonial process conducted with specialized tools, where time and patience were as crucial as any raw material. Stepping into the workshop of a master unguentarius, you would not find bubbling cauldrons or a cluttered mess. Instead, you would see an orderly array of specialized equipment, each piece designed for a specific, delicate task that preserved the integrity of the volatile scents they worked with. The perfumer's primary vessel was the laginos, a distinctive glass flask with a narrow neck and a single handle. Glass was the material of choice for a very important reason. It was non-porous. Unlike earthenware, which could absorb and trap the oils and aromas of previous batches, contaminating the next creation, glass provided a perfectly inert container. It allowed the perfumer to monitor the clarity and color of his infusion without risking any unwanted scent transfer. This commitment to purity underscores the sophistication of their practice. They understood that the vessel itself could be a source of spoilage, and they chose their tools accordingly. For the initial preparation of solid ingredients, the workshop would echo with the rhythmic sound of grinding. This is where the heavy, durable mortars and pestles came into play. While common folk might use wooden or simple ceramic versions, a serious unguentarius invested in mortars made of marble, porphyry, or bronze. These materials were not just status symbols, they were functionally superior. Their immense weight and non-porous, polished surfaces ensured that hard resins like myrrh or frankincense could be ground to a perfectly fine, consistent powder without the mortar itself wearing away and adding grit to the precious mixture. Grinding was the first act of unlocking a scent. By crushing a resin, its complex aromatic compounds were exposed, creating more surface area for the oil to work on during the infusion. The perfumer had to judge the perfect coarseness, too fine, and the powder might become a muddy, unfilterable mess, too coarse, and the oil would fail to extract the full depth of the fragrance. This was a skill learned through years of tactile experience, a nuanced understanding of how to physically break down a substance to best serve its aromatic potential. Once the solid ingredients were prepared, the slow, patient work of infusion began. The powdered resins or bruised flower petals would be carefully added to the laginos filled with the base oil. The flask would be sealed, often with a waxed cloth or a tight-fitting stopper, to prevent the precious volatile oils from evaporating into the air. Then it was placed in a cool, dark corner of the workshop to macerate. This could take weeks. The perfumer wasn't idle during this time. He was a careful custodian. He would regularly agitate the vessel, swirling its contents to ensure every particle of spice or petal was fully immersed, and that the infusion was proceeding evenly. He was monitoring, smelling, and observing. This long maceration was essential for creating depth. The oil wasn't just being flavored, it was undergoing a slow molecular exchange, absorbing the heavier, fixative base notes from the resins that would give the final perfume its lasting power on the skin. But a single infusion was rarely enough to achieve the desired complexity. The most celebrated Roman perfumes were often the result of a multi-stage process, a layering of scents that could take a skilled artisan over a month to complete. Imagine a perfumer creating his signature spikenard and rose blend. He might start with a base of ben oil and begin a cold maceration with his most prized spikenard root. After several weeks, he would not simply bottle this oil. Instead, he would perform the next critical step, filtration. Using a bronze strainer, sometimes lined with fine linen cloth, he would carefully separate the now scented oil from the spent plant material. This clarified oil, now rich with the deep, earthy notes of spikenard, would be transferred into a clean glass vessel. Then a new batch of fresh, fragrant rose petals would be introduced for a second, shorter infusion. This sequential method allowed him to build a fragrance with true top, middle, and base notes. The spikenard provided the long-lasting, musky foundation, while the rose, added later, contributed its brighter, more volatile floralcy that would be the first scent to greet the nose. A perfumer might even do a third infusion with something like a hint of saffron or crushed cinnamon bark to add a final, spicy accent. This layered approach is what separated a master's work from a simple infused oil. It created a fragrance that evolved and told a story from the moment it was applied to hours later. The tools of the glass flask, the marble mortar, the bronze strainer were the instruments. But the true art was in the perfumer's patient, orchestrated use of time itself. This deep connection between scent and well-being extended powerfully into the realm of Roman medicine, where the line between a perfumer's workshop and a physician's dispensary was often indistinguishable. In the ancient Roman understanding of health, based largely on the Greek theory of the four humors, illness was believed to arise from an imbalance within the body. Certain scents were thought to possess the power to correct these imbalances, either by heating or cooling the body, drying out excess moisture, or adding vital warmth. Therefore, a scented oil wasn't just a pleasant unguent. It was a potent therapeutic tool, a medicine you applied to your skin that was believed to work its way into your very constitution to restore harmony. The unguentarius, in this context, was not merely an artisan but a partner in healthcare, creating complex aromatic prescriptions that targeted everything from mundane headaches to profound melancholy. Consider the common complaint of a headache. A modern solution might be a pain relief tablet, but a Roman physician like Galen or a household practitioner would likely recommend a very specific scented oil. One popular recipe for head pain and tension, recorded by writers like Dioscorides, involved a blend of rose oil, myrtle oil, and vinegar. The logic was beautifully holistic. Rose oil was classified as cooling and moistening. Its gentle, calming fragrance was thought to soothe the overheated passions, and inflammation believed to cause pounding headaches. Myrtle, on the other hand, was considered astringent and drying, helping to counteract any excess moisture or rheum in the head. The vinegar, with its sharp, penetrating scent, was believed to cut through the congestion and open the passages. This wasn't a random mixture of pleasant smells. It was a carefully calibrated aromatic formula designed to rebalance the humors in a specific part of the body. The patient would rub this blend onto their temples and forehead, inhaling the medicated vapors as the oil was absorbed, engaging both the sense of smell and the skin in the healing process. Digestive troubles were another area where scented oils played a starring role. For issues like indigestion, bloating, or stomach cramps, the remedies focused on warming and carminative herbs ingredients that relieved gas. A common digestive blend might feature oils infused with mint, rue, or wormwood. Mint, with its bright, sharp coolness, was paradoxically thought to bring warmth to the stomach and stimulate a sluggish digestion. Rue, a powerfully aromatic herb, was considered a major antispasmodic, its strong, somewhat bitter scent believed to calm cramping muscles in the gut. The application method was crucial. The oil would be gently massaged in a clockwise motion onto the abdomen. The warmth of the hand combined with the massaging action was thought to help the medicinal properties of the herbs penetrate deeper, while the act of inhaling the scent was believed to send healing signals directly to the stomach. This practice reflects a sophisticated understanding of the gut-brain connection. Long before modern science gave it a name, they intuitively knew that a powerful, pleasant aroma could alter one's physical state, easing discomfort not just through topical absorption, but through the very act of smelling. Perhaps the most fascinating medical application was for what we would now call mood disorders or emotional distress. The Romans had a profound belief in the ability of scent to directly influence the spirit and the mind. For someone suffering from lethargy, melancholy, or what was often called a darkening of the spirits, a physician might prescribe an uplifting blend of saffron and marjoram. Saffron, incredibly expensive and radiantly golden, was thought to be a powerful antidote to sadness. Its vibrant color and complex, honey-like aroma believed to literally bring light and warmth into a gloomy soul. Marjoram, with its sweet, comforting, herbaceous scent, was considered a tonic for the nerves and a promoter of cheerful thoughts. Conversely, for anxiety, agitation, or insomnia, the prescription would shift to more sedative scents. A blend heavy with the narcotic sweetness of poppy syrup, the calming floralcy of violet, or the earthy depth of crushed iris root might be recommended. The patient would anoint their wrists, chest, and behind their ears before sleep, creating a personal cloud of tranquil fragrance meant to lull the mind into rest. This represents an early form of aromatherapy, a recognition that our emotional state is deeply tied to our sensory experiences, and that a carefully crafted scent could be as powerful as any potion in restoring peace and balance to a troubled mind. This intersection of perfumery and medicine meant that the unguentarius had to be a master of both botany and human anatomy. He needed to know not just which plants smelled good together, but which ones possessed heating, cooling, drying, or moistening properties according to the dominant medical theories of his day. His workshop was in effect a pharmacy. He would stock his shelves not only with the roses and myrrh used for luxury perfume, but also with more medicinal smelling ingredients like strongly scented pennyroyal for relieving congestion, or bitter costus root for its purported purifying effects. His skill lay in being able to take these sometimes harsh or pungent medicinal herbs and weave them into a base of fine olive or ben oil in a way that made the remedy both effective and, if not always pleasant, at least tolerable to use. The success of his business depended on his reputation for creating blends that actually made people feel better. Whether that was easing a senator's nagging headache after a long day in the forum, or calming a nervous bride before her wedding. His art was a fundamental part of the Roman healthcare system. a testament to a worldview where beauty, pleasure, and healing were not separate pursuits, but intimately and wonderfully intertwined. If the air in a Roman home was filled with the fragrance of status, and the workshop of an unguentarius was a place of medicinal and artistic blending, then the atmosphere of a Roman temple was something else entirely, a realm where scent was believed to be the very breath of the gods. In Roman religion, the divine was not distant or abstract. It was thought to be present and perceptible, and nothing signaled that divine presence more powerfully than a cloud of fragrant smoke or the rich aroma of sacred oil. Scent was the medium of communication, a tangible offering that pleased the celestial senses and carried human prayers directly to the heavens. This wasn't a matter of simply making a space smell pleasant. It was a fundamental and non-negotiable component of piety, with specific protocols governing every drop of oil and every grain of incense used in the state's most important ritual. To understand the sacred role of these oils is to understand the Roman conviction that the gods were active participants in their world, and that the right fragrance could secure their favor for the entire empire. The most common and constant use of scented oils in worship was the act of anointing the cult statues themselves. In the dim, incense-hazed interior of a temple, the statue of a god was not merely a representation. It was a vessel for the divine presence. As such, it was treated with the same reverence and care as a living, breathing dignitary. Priests would regularly anoint these marble or bronze figures with precious oils, a ritual act of purification and devotion. The specific oil chosen was far from arbitrary. Each major deity had their own aromatic profile, a signature scent that reflected their nature and domain. Jupiter, the king of the gods, was associated with the most regal and expensive scents, often frankincense, which produced a clean, citrusy, and majestic smoke befitting his supreme authority. His wife Juno, the protector of women and the state, was often honored with myrrh, a scent considered dignified, protective, and slightly bittersweet. Venus, the goddess of love and beauty, was naturally linked to the overwhelming fragrance of roses, while Mars, the god of war, might be propitiated with stronger, more pungent oils like costus or spikenard, scents that conveyed raw power and virility. Anointing a statue with the correct oil was like dressing it in the proper divine attire. It was an essential act of recognition and respect. Beyond the statues, scented oils were central to the ritual of sacrifice, the cornerstone of Roman public religion. Before an animal was offered to the gods, it was first purified. This often involved sprinkling the beast with a mixture of wine and mola salsa, a sacred salted flour, but it also frequently included anointing its head with scented oil. This act marked the animal as set apart, transforming it from a simple beast of the field into a consecrated offering worthy of a god. The smoke from the burning sacrifice, the suffermentum, was itself the primary vehicle for the prayer, and the quality of that smoke was paramount. Cheap, common incense would have been an insult. The state spared no expense, purchasing vast quantities of the finest frankincense and myrrh to ensure the prayers of the Roman people rose to the gods on the most aromatic smoke possible. There are records of temples stockpiling entire warehouses full of these resins, a clear indication of their central role in maintaining the pax deorum, the peace of the gods. A failure in this aromatic duty, a poorly performed anointing, or a low-grade offering of incense was believed to risk divine displeasure, which could manifest as military defeat, plague, or famine. The pressure on the priests and the unguentarii who supplied them was immense, for the very safety of the state was thought to hang in the fragrant balance. This sacred protocol extended with profound solemnity to the final rite of passage, the funeral. In Roman belief, the journey to the afterlife was a precarious one. and the proper treatment of the body was essential for ensuring the deceased's peaceful rest and their successful transition into the realm of the ancestors. Anointing the body with scented oils was one of the most important first steps. This practice, performed by the family or professional undertakers, served multiple sacred purposes. On a practical level, the oils helped to mask the odor of decay during the often multi-day period of lying in state. But on a spiritual level, the anointing was a final act of purification and honor, preparing the soul for its journey. Myrrh was again a frequent choice here, its solemn, medicinal scent perfectly suited to the gravity of the occasion. For wealthier families, demonstrating their status continued even in death, and they would use incredibly expensive blends featuring nard or cinnamon to make a public statement about their dignity and wealth one last time. The scent that accompanied a funeral procession was a powerful public signal, telling all who smelled it that a person of consequence was being laid to rest with the full honors required to appease their spirit and maintain the family's standing in the community. The creation of these sacred oils was therefore a process shrouded in ritual and stricture. An unguentarius commissioned to produce a batch of oil for a state temple or a major public festival wasn't just fulfilling a commercial order, he was performing a religious duty. The work was likely preceded by prayers or purificatory rites. The ingredients had to be of the highest possible quality, meticulously sourced and verified. There would be no adulteration with cheaper substitutes, no shortcuts in the maceration process. The protocols might even dictate the type of vessel used, perhaps a new laginos reserved solely for sacred commissions, or the time of day the blending was performed. This meticulous attention to detail was driven by the belief that the gods would know if the offering was impure or prepared with a careless hand. The sacred blend was more than a commodity. It was a conduit, and its integrity was as important as the words of the prayer spoken by the high priest. In the hands of the unguentarius, art, science, and faith converged, producing not just a fragrance, but a key that could unlock the ear of Jupiter himself. All of this rich history and intricate craft can sometimes feel abstract, like a story told through ancient texts. But in the early 20th century, archaeologists working in the ash-buried city of Pompeii made a discovery that turned this story into stunning, tangible reality. While excavating a street known today as the Via dell'Abbondanza, they uncovered the perfectly preserved shop of an unguentarius, frozen in time on that fateful day in August, 79 AD. This wasn't just a room with a few scattered jars. It was a complete commercial perfumery, a time capsule offering an unprecedented look at the daily business of a Roman scent merchant. Stepping into this space, archaeologists found themselves standing exactly where customers once did. Surrounded by the very tools and ingredients the shop's owner used to create his aromatic wares. The volcanic ash from Mount Vesuvius, which so tragically ended all life in the city, acted as a remarkable preservative, sealing the shop and its contents for nearly 2,000 years, waiting to reveal its secrets. The centerpiece of the shop was a masonry counter, a sturdy workbench that still held its original equipment. Set into the countertop were several distinctive, deep terracotta jars known as dolia. These weren't the delicate glass laginoi used for slow infusion. These were the shop's stockpots, the large, porous vessels where the perfumer would have stored his bulk supply of base oils, likely that high-quality, unripe olive oil ready to be blended and sold. Lining the counter and shelves behind it was an array of beautiful, elegant glass bottles and flasks in various shapes and sizes. Some were small, delicate unguentaria, the classic tear-shaped bottles designed to hold a single portion of precious oil. Others were larger jugs and beakers. The presence of glass, a relatively expensive material, immediately signaled that this was a high-end establishment catering to a wealthy clientele. Perhaps most poignant were the sets of weights and scales, left exactly as they were when the shopkeeper last used them to measure out a costly ingredient for a waiting customer. This was not a makeshift operation. It was a professional, well-equipped retail space dedicated to the art of fragrance. The real scientific breakthrough, however, came from what was left inside those vessels. The bottoms of the dolia and many of the glass bottles contained a dark, solidified residue. For decades, these residues were curiosities, but today, with modern analytical techniques like gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, we can read them like aromatic fingerprints. Scientists have been able to identify the specific chemical compounds trapped in these residues, providing direct, incontrovertible evidence of what was being sold. The analyses confirmed the writings of Pliny and Dioscorides in spectacular fashion. The residues contained traces of pinene, a marker for pine resin, which was often used as a fixative. They found the chemical signatures of various terpenes associated with myrtle and rosemary. In some bottles, they identified sesquiterpenes linked to myrrh and the distinct compounds of linalool and geraniol, which are key components of lavender and rose oil. This was no longer just a description in a book. This was the actual scent profile of a Pompeian perfume, chemically verified. This single shop provides a revolutionary understanding of the commercial scale and practice of Roman perfumery. The setup suggests this unguentarius was both a producer and a retailer. He likely performed the initial, messy work of grinding resins and macerating oils in a back room or a separate workshop, then used the front counter to create custom blends for his customers and sell his pre-made stock. The variety of bottle sizes indicates he sold different quantities, from a small, expensive vial of a signature blend to a larger, more utilitarian container of a simpler, everyday oil. The discovery of the weights is particularly telling. In a trade where a tiny amount of a substance like saffron or spikenard could represent a significant cost, precise measurement was essential for both fair trade and for replicating successful recipes consistently. This was a business run on precision and trust, where the quality of your measures reflected the quality of your product. Ultimately, the Pompeii perfume shop closes the gap between the grand stories of imperial luxury and the everyday life of a Roman town. It shows us that the culture of scent wasn't confined to the palaces of Rome. Here, in a prosperous but provincial city, a successful merchant was catering to the olfactory desires of local businessmen, wealthy landowners, and perhaps even visitors from out of town. The citizens of Pompeii wanted to smell like Romans. They sought the same sophistication, the same connection to a wider world of trade, and the same social signaling through fragrance that we have been exploring. This small shop, preserved under the ash, stands as a powerful, silent testament to the ubiquity and importance of the unguentarius's art. It gives a name and a face to the countless anonymous craftsmen who supplied the scented landscape of the Roman world, allowing us to finally step over the threshold and breathe in the air of their vanished world. Creating a scent that would last for months, or even years, was one of the greatest challenges facing the Roman unguentarius. In our modern world, we take perfume stability for granted, thanks to synthetic fixatives and sealed bottles. But for the ancient perfumer, the enemy was everywhere: light, heat, and most of all, oxygen. The delicate aromatic compounds in rose petals or the complex molecules in spikenard root are inherently volatile. They want to escape into the air, and when they interact with oxygen, they begin to break down, turning a once priceless fragrance into a sour, rancid oil. The entire craft of the unguentarius was, in many ways, a protracted battle against this inevitable decay. A race to capture a fleeting moment of botanical beauty, and hold it captive in a bottle for as long as possible. Their ingenious, if sometimes imperfect, solutions form a fascinating chapter in the history of practical chemistry. The most straightforward weapon in their arsenal was the vessel itself. As we saw in the Pompeii shop, glass was the material of choice for storing the finished product. Its non-porous nature created a crucial barrier, but the design of the bottles was just as important. Those small, tear-shaped unguentarii with their narrow necks, and often a single small opening, weren't just aesthetically pleasing. They were functional. The limited surface area at the neck reduced the amount of oil exposed to the air, dramatically slowing down the oxidation process. Some bottles were even sealed with a dab of wax or a tight-fitting stopper made of wood or stone, creating a rudimentary airtight environment. Think of it like a modern wine bottle. A cork preserves the wine far better than an open jug. The Romans understood this principle intuitively, using their glass-blowing skills to create containers that were specifically engineered to protect their precious contents from the elements. But the real chemical ingenuity began long before the perfume ever reached the bottle. During the initial preparation of the raw materials, one of the most common and effective methods for preserving the potency of flowers was the use of salt. When an unguentarius received a shipment of rose petals from Paestum, he couldn't use them all at once, so he would layer the fresh petals in large jars with coarse sea salt. The salt acted as a desiccant, pulling the moisture out of the petals. This was vital because moisture is a primary driver of spoilage. It encourages the growth of bacteria and mold that would quickly destroy the flower's fragrance. The salted petals would shrink and wither, but their aromatic oils would be preserved within the dried plant matter. When the perfumer was ready to create a new batch, he could simply rinse the salt off these preserved petals and use them in his maceration process. This technique effectively allowed him to have a supply of fresh roses available for much of the year, long after the short blooming season had ended. Wine and vinegar played another fascinating dual role, acting as both a preservative and a fragrant component in their own right. Many recipes, including those recorded by Dioscorides, call for the use of wine in the maceration process. The science behind this is sound. Wine contains alcohol, a well-known solvent and preservative. While the Romans didn't have access to high-proof distilled alcohol, the natural ethanol in wine could help to extract different aromatic compounds from the plants than the oil could alone, creating a more complex initial extract. Furthermore, the acidic environment created by the wine or vinegar would inhibit the growth of spoilage microorganisms. The perfumer might create an initial infusion of myrrh in wine, allow it to steep, and then combine this fragrant wine with the base oil, sometimes gently heating the mixture to evaporate the water and alcohol, and leave behind the scent-infused oil. This multi-step process shows a sophisticated understanding of using different chemical mediums to achieve a more stable and complex final product. The Romans also possessed a deep, if instinctive, understanding of the antimicrobial properties of certain resins. This is where the line between perfume, medicine, and food preservation becomes wonderfully blurred. Resins like frankincense and myrrh were not just prized for their scent. They were known to have preservative qualities. These resins contain natural compounds that are toxic to many bacteria and fungi. By including a significant proportion of powdered myrrh in a perfume blend, the unguentarius wasn't just adding a dark, smoky base note. He was actively fortifying his creation against microbial attack. Similarly, pine resin and cedarwood oil, both common ingredients, have strong antiseptic properties. It's likely that the observation of these properties in a religious or medicinal context, noting that wounds treated with myrrh healed cleanly, or that food stored in cedarwood containers lasted longer, directly influenced their use in perfumery. They were, in effect, creating a self-preserving fragrance, where one ingredient helped to protect the others from ruin. So how do we know all of this? How can we be so specific about challenges and solutions from 2 millennia ago? The answers are now being revealed in modern laboratories through the emerging field of archaeological chemistry. The process begins with those very residues we found in the bottoms of the bottles from Pompeii and other sites. Scientists take a tiny, almost microscopic sample of this dark, hardened substance. The first and most powerful tool they use is gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or GCMS. In this process, the sample is vaporized and passed through a long, coiled column. Different chemical compounds in the vapor travel through this column at different speeds, separating them from one another. As each compound exits the column, it enters a mass spectrometer, which essentially shatters it into pieces and measures the weight of those fragments. This creates a unique chemical fingerprint for every single molecule that was in the ancient residue. By analyzing these fingerprints, scientists can identify specific biomarkers. For instance, the presence of acetic acid tells them that wine or vinegar was used in the recipe. They can find traces of specific terpenes that are the undeniable signature of pine resin. They can identify the characteristic compounds of myrrh, or the specific chemical profile of rose oxide from rose petals. But the analysis goes even deeper than just identifying ingredients. By looking at the degradation products, the chemical fragments that are created when a fresh compound breaks down over time, scientists can actually reverse engineer the original substance and even deduce how it was processed. For example, the way a triglyceride, a fat molecule from the base oil, has broken down can reveal whether the oil was heated during preparation or if it was simply cold macerated. This allows them to distinguish between different ancient production methods with remarkable precision. Sometimes the chemical evidence directly confirms the historical texts. A recipe in Pliny might describe a preservative technique using salt, and the GCMS analysis of a residue might reveal elevated sodium levels alongside the preserved floral compound. Other times, the science reveals surprises ingredients that aren't mentioned in any surviving text, or combinations that we hadn't anticipated. This dialogue between the written word and the molecular evidence is what allows us to move from speculation to confident understanding. We are no longer just reading about Roman perfume. We are analyzing its chemical ghost, molecule by molecule, rebuilding the unguentarius's craft not from his recipes, but from the enduring, silent testimony of the oils he left behind. While the idea of a Roman perfume might suggest a single, unified style emanating from the capital, the reality across the sprawling empire was a vibrant tapestry of regional tastes. The scents that wafted through the streets of Alexandria in Egypt were distinctly different from those in a Gallic outpost or a Spanish villa, each telling a unique story of local resources, indigenous traditions, and cultural assimilation. The Roman world wasn't a monolith. It was a collection of provinces, each with its own aromatic fingerprint, and the unguentarii in these far-flung regions became masters at blending imperial fashion with local character. To understand this diversity is to appreciate how Roman culture didn't just impose itself. It adapted, absorbed, and was subtly transformed by the lands it conquered. In the eastern provinces, particularly in great cosmopolitan centers like Alexandria and Antioch, the perfume tradition was ancient, sophisticated, and leaned decisively toward the heavy and the exotic. These cities were the gateways to the east, the endpoints of the caravan routes that brought frankincense, myrrh, and spikenard from Arabia and beyond. Here, perfumers worked with a palette of ingredients that were not just expensive imports, but part of the local aromatic landscape. An Alexandrian unguentarius had direct access to the finest ben oil from the Nile Delta and the legendary rose fields of Egypt. But he also had centuries of inherited knowledge from pharaonic perfumers who prized intense, long-lasting, and spiritually potent resins. The preferred scents in the East were therefore deep, complex, and profoundly resinous. A typical Alexandrian blend might feature a base of precious ben oil, saturated with the smoky richness of frankincense, the medicinal bitterness of myrrh, and a touch of that ultimate luxury, spikenard, creating a fragrance that was sultry, mysterious, and incredibly persistent. This was a scent profile meant for hot climates, where the warmth of the air would amplify and radiate these powerful base notes, creating a personal cloud of opulence that was unmistakably Eastern and highly coveted by the Roman elite who encountered it. Contrast this with the heartland of Italy, where a different aesthetic was taking shape. The Italian peninsula, with its sun-drenched hillsides covered in rosemary, thyme, myrtle, and lavender, developed a preference for lighter, greener, and more floral compositions. While the wealthy in Rome itself might clamor for expensive Eastern imports as status symbols, the everyday scents and the true local character leaned toward these aromatic herbs. An unguentarius in Pompeii or Capua would have built his core business around olive oil-based infusions. His best-selling product might be a simple, refreshing blend of lavender and rosemary, a clean, herbaceous scent used after the baths. For more festive occasions, he might create a more complex floral using the famous roses of Paestum. But he would likely brighten it with a splash of local lemon verbena or the citrusy scent of bergamot, creating a fragrance that was voluptuous but also vibrant and uplifting. The Italian nose seemed to favor a certain brightness, a connection to the familiar landscape of the Mediterranean maquis. These scents didn't have the overwhelming, temple-like gravity of their Eastern counterparts. They evoked the villa garden, the herb patch, and the sunny countryside, reflecting a lifestyle that, while still luxurious, was rooted in the local terrain. As we move westward into provinces like Hispania and Gallia, we see an even more fascinating process of fusion and adaptation. These were regions without a deep, pre-existing tradition of complex perfumery. When Roman customs arrived, they were grafted onto local practices. The native populations already used native plants like heather, bracken, and certain pine resins for practical and ritual purposes. The Roman unguentarius setting up shop in a new Gallo-Roman town faced a choice: import all his ingredients at great cost, or innovate using what was available. The result was a new, hybrid style of perfume. He might follow a classic Roman recipe for a rose and saffron blend, but if true saffron was unavailable, he could substitute a locally available, similarly pungent and yellow-colored herb like safflower or even tansy. His base oil would almost certainly be the highest quality local olive oil from Hispania, or in regions where olives didn't thrive, a fine walnut or almond oil. These regional bases imparted their own subtle, nutty character to the final fragrance, creating a scent that a perfumer from Rome itself would recognize as Roman in concept, but distinctly provincial in its execution. These Western blends were often simpler, more straightforward, and more pragmatic, a testament to the resourcefulness of artisans making do far from the empire's aromatic centers. This incredible regional variation wasn't just a matter of ingredient availability. It was a powerful form of cultural identity. The scent you wore could immediately signal your origins. A senator visiting from Rome, anointed with a classic Italian blend of rose and myrtle, would smell noticeably different from a wealthy merchant from Antioch, who favored a dense, spicy concoction of myrrh and cinnamon. In the bustling, multi-ethnic port of Ostia, Your nose could conduct a tour of the empire without ever leaving the docks. This diversity also created a hierarchy of prestige. The Eastern scents, with their aura of ancient mystery and immense cost, were universally acknowledged as the pinnacle of luxury. To wear a genuine Alexandrine perfume was to display a level of wealth and worldliness that a locally produced Italian floral simply could not match. The Roman fascination with the exotic East was in part an olfactory obsession. Conquering a general might bring back not just gold and slaves, but also the recipes and perfumers of a defeated kingdom, introducing new aromatic fashions to the capital, and further enriching the empire's ever-evolving scentscape. The story of Roman perfume, therefore, is not one of a single, static style, but a dynamic and ongoing conversation between the center and the periphery, between the imported and the local, creating a fragrant empire as diverse as the people who called it home. To fully grasp the value placed on these aromatic creations, we need to step away from our modern frame of reference, where a bottle of perfume is a manageable luxury, and step into the Roman economic mindset, where a single vial of the finest spikenard oil could represent a lifetime of savings for an ordinary citizen. The cost of high-quality scented oils was not merely expensive. It was astronomically prohibitive, creating a fragrant barrier between the social classes that was as rigid as any law. The Roman satirist Petronius, in his work The Satyricon, gives us a darkly comical glimpse into this reality through his fictional freedman Trimalchio, who brags about his wife's perfume habits, saying she drinks a fortune in scent. While exaggerated, this points to a fundamental truth. Wearing the right smell was a public display of your net worth. The numbers recorded by historians are staggering. Pliny the Elder, our ever-vigilant source, reports that the highest grade of Indian spikenard could cost as much as 100 denarii per Roman pound. To put that in perspective, a common legionary soldier in the 1st century earned roughly 300 denarii for an entire year of service. This means that a single pound of this one ingredient, just one component in a complex perfume, could cost a third of a soldier's annual salary. A finished perfume incorporating spikenard, along with other costly elements like myrrh and saffron, would be priced far beyond the reach of anyone but the senatorial elite or the imperial household. This wasn't just a purchase, it was a capital investment, a liquid asset you wore on your skin. To anoint yourself with such a blend was the equivalent of walking around today with a luxury sports car's value evaporating from your wrists and neck throughout the day. Translating these ancient prices into modern equivalents is a challenging but revealing exercise. Economists use several methods, from comparing the price of staple goods like wheat to looking at the silver content of the denarius. Using a basic wage comparison, where a Roman soldier's annual pay is roughly analogous to a modern median income, that 1 pound container of spikenard could equate to over $15,000 in today's money. But this might actually be an underestimate, given the extreme rarity of the substance. A more telling comparison might be to look at it as a proportion of elite spending. The most expensive perfumes were statement pieces, akin to a modern haute couture gown or a piece of high jewelry items whose value is defined by exclusivity, craftsmanship, and the sheer audacity of their cost. When a Roman noblewoman commissioned a unique scent from her favorite unguentarii, she wasn't just buying a pleasant aroma. She was funding a miniature expedition to the edges of the known world and having its treasures distilled into a form only she could possess. So why were these ingredients so phenomenally expensive? The answer lies in a perfect storm of geography, labor, and logistics. Take saffron, for instance. This spice, derived from the delicate stigmas of the Crocus sativus flower, required an almost unimaginable amount of hand labor. It takes over 70,000 hand-picked saffron flowers to produce just 1 pound of the dried spice. Each tiny thread-like stigma must be carefully plucked by hand, a painstaking process that has changed little in 2,000 years. This immense labor intensity was compounded by its geographic journey. The finest saffron was believed to come from Cilicia, in modern-day Turkey, and had to be transported overland or by sea to Rome. Every middleman, every tax collector at a provincial border, and every merchant who handled the fragile cargo added their own markup, multiplying the price with each mile it traveled further from its source. The journey of Indian spikenard, however, makes saffron's trip look like a simple commute. This plant grew high in the remote Himalayan valleys, a region so distant it existed at the very limits of Roman geographical knowledge. The raw material, the root of the plant, had to be harvested and processed locally, then begin an epic overland trek. It would travel along the Silk Road or other caravan routes, passing through countless kingdoms and territories. It faced the constant threats of banditry, natural disaster, and spoilage. By the time a shipment of spikenard root reached a Roman port on the Red Sea, it had already accrued a cost that reflected its incredible journey. Then the real expense began. The Roman state imposed a massive import duty, known as the portoria, which could be as high as 25% on luxury goods entering the empire. This tax wasn't just a revenue stream. It was a deliberate policy to profit from the elite's insatiable appetite for Eastern luxuries, an appetite that was constantly criticized by moralists like Pliny, who saw it as a drain on the empire's wealth. This insanely costly trade had profound economic consequences for the Roman state. Pliny famously lamented that India, China, and Arabia were draining the empire of its gold and silver. He estimated that 100 million sesterces, a sum that could feed the city of Rome for months, was flowing out of the empire every year to pay for these Eastern luxuries. This created a significant trade deficit with the East, a problem the Romans tried to solve by mining more silver and gold, and by promoting the export of Roman goods like glassware, wine, and red gloss pottery, known as terra sigillata. But the demand for scent was relentless. The economic engine of perfumery thus fueled not just local workshops, but entire global supply chains, enriching foreign merchants and Arabian middlemen while creating a class of incredibly wealthy Roman importers and unguentarii, who knew how to cater to the whims of the super-rich. The high stakes of this trade inevitably bred a thriving industry of fraud and adulteration. Just as a modern art forger preys on the desire for a priceless masterpiece, unscrupulous perfumers in the Roman world developed sophisticated methods to deceive their wealthy clients. Since the average customer would have no frame of reference for what genuine, first-press spikenard oil should smell like, it was easy to pass off inferior products. Common tricks included using a base of low quality, rancid olive oil, and masking its odor with a small amount of a powerful, cheap aromatic like costus root or Syrian nard, a lesser quality substitute. Other adulterants included adding tree resins to add bulk and viscosity, making a thin, diluted oil appear rich and concentrated. Some would even reuse the spent, already infused plant material from a previous batch, giving it a second, much weaker infusion to create a pale imitation of the real thing. This widespread fraud speaks to the powerful social pressure to participate in the culture of scent. Even if one couldn't afford the real thing, a wealthy freedman, newly rich but lacking the pedigree of the old aristocracy, might be especially vulnerable to such deception, desperate to buy the olfactory symbols of a status he was not born into. The very best, most reputable unguentarii would have built their clientele on a foundation of trust, guaranteeing the provenance of their ingredients and the purity of their blends. Their reputation was their bond, and it allowed them to charge premium prices for a product that was, by its nature, almost impossible for the customer to objectively verify. In the end, the price of a Roman perfume was never just about the cost of its components. It was a complex calculation of rarity, labor, transportation, taxation, and the intangible, almost magical value of being able to carry the scent of empire and exclusivity in the palm of your hand. Now let's step inside one of the great Roman bathhouses, where the art of scent truly came to life in a daily public ritual. The experience of the baths was far more than just getting clean. It was a carefully choreographed sequence of heat, steam, water, and most importantly, fragrance, designed to cleanse, restore, and perfume the body from the inside out. From the moment you entered the bustling, echoing halls of the Thermae, you were embarking on a sensory journey where scented oils were not an optional luxury, but an essential tool in a multi-stage process of purification and renewal. The air itself was thick with a damp, complex aroma, a base note of steam on hot stone, overlaid with the faint, clean scent of the water, and punctuated by the drifting personal fragrances of dozens of bathers at different stages of their own ritual. This was a place where the body was not just washed, but fundamentally transformed, and oil was the medium of that transformation. The ritual began in the warm room, the tepidarium. This was the gentle introduction, a space for your body to acclimate to the heat, and for your muscles to begin to relax. Here, before you even broke a sweat, a slave or a personal attendant would begin the first phase of the olfactory process. You would recline on a warm marble slab, and the attendant would pour a generous amount of simple, high-quality olive oil onto your skin. This initial application wasn't yet about fragrance, it was about function. The oil served as a protective barrier and a cleansing agent. As you moved next into the intense, dry heat of the coldarium, your pores would begin to open freely. The oil, now warmed by your skin and the ambient temperature, would mix with the sweat and dirt being drawn out of your body. It formed a slick, emulsified layer that trapped the impurities, preparing them for removal. In this sweltering room, the air would be filled with the straightforward, earthy smell of pure olive oil, mingling with human perspiration, the honest, unperfumed scent of the body at work. The true climax of the cleansing process came next, with an instrument that is quintessentially Roman, the strigil. This curved metal scraper was the key to the entire operation. After you had soaked in the heat long enough, you would move to a slightly cooler area, still standing or sitting, and the attendant would take the strigil and, with long, firm, practiced strokes, scrape the now dirty mixture of oil, sweat, and grime directly off your skin. The collected residue would be wiped from the blade into a small vessel. Archaeologists have even found pots labeled for this specific purpose. This act of scraping was profoundly practical. It was how you actually got clean, exfoliating the skin and removing the layer of filth that the oil had captured. But it was also symbolically powerful, a physical stripping away of the day's labors and the grime of the city, leaving the skin utterly smooth, open, and receptive. Only after this deep cleansing was complete could the true perfuming begin. With the skin now perfectly clean, dry, and warm, it was time to return to the tepidarium for the final, luxurious anointing. The attendant would now bring out the precious, fragrant unguents. This was the moment of personal expression and status. The simple olive oil was gone. In its place was a complex blend of rose, saffron, myrrh, or spikenard, selected from your own personal flask. The warm, receptive skin acted like a perfect canvas, absorbing the scented oil deeply and allowing its aroma to bloom. The perfumer's art was now meeting the bather's biology. The warmth helped to volatilize the fragrance, releasing the top notes immediately, while the oil itself, now unhindered by dirt or previous layers, could penetrate and bind with the skin's natural oils, fixing the deeper base notes for hours to come. This second application created a multi-layered scent experience, the initial bright burst of the fragrance, followed by a long, slow, intimate release that would become your personal aura for the rest of the day or evening. This entire sequence, oil, sweat, scraping, and re-anointing, created a fragrance experience of unparalleled depth and longevity. A modern perfume sprayed onto the skin is a single surface-level event. The Roman method, by contrast, was a process of replacement. You weren't just adding scent on top of your skin. You were first stripping your skin bare, and then infusing it with fragrance from within. The heat and steam of the baths prepared the body, opening the pores and increasing circulation, making the skin more absorbent. The scraping ensured there was no oily residue left on the surface to block the perfume or turn rancid. The result was a scent that seemed to emanate from the body itself, rather than sitting on top of it. When you finally emerged from the baths, dressed in fresh clothes, you carried with you not just the memory of the fragrance, but its very essence, woven into your warm, clean skin, a lasting testament to a ritual that perfectly blended practical hygiene with the highest art of personal perfumery. For the ancient Romans, a scent was never just a simple matter of chemistry or botany. It was a story waiting to be told, a direct thread connecting the wearer to the epic dramas of the gods. The mythologies surrounding their most prized ingredients provided a powerful narrative framework, transforming a luxury product into a tangible piece of divine power and a potent tool for personal transformation. When a noblewoman anointed herself with rose oil, she wasn't just applying a pleasant floral fragrance. She was invoking the presence of Venus herself, aligning her own identity with the goddess of love and beauty. The unguentarii were masters of this symbolic language, understanding that the most successful perfumes sold more than just a scent. They sold a myth, an identity, and a connection to the celestial realm that was as intoxicating as the fragrance itself. Consider the rose, that undeniable queen of the Roman olfactory world. Its dominance was inextricably linked to its most famous divine patron, Venus. The myth of its origin was as beautiful as it was tragic. According to the most popular Roman version, the flower was created from the blood of the beautiful youth Adonis, Venus's mortal lover, who was fatally gored by a wild boar. As Venus rushed to his side, she pricked her foot on a thorny bush, and where her divine blood mingled with his upon the earth, the first crimson roses sprang forth. This poignant story imbued the rose with layers of meaning. It was a symbol of passionate, often tragic love, of divine sacrifice, and of breathtaking beauty born from profound loss. For a Roman, using rose perfume was an act of profound symbolism. It was a way to carry the essence of this sacred story on one's skin, to attract the favor of Venus in matters of the heart, and to embody the very principle of divine beauty and desire. A merchant selling rose unguent wasn't just selling a product. He was offering a piece of this myth, promising the wearer a fragment of Venus's own power and allure. But the mythological connections could also carry stark warnings, serving as moral lessons about the dangers of obsession and vanity. The most powerful example of this is the story of the Narcissus flower. According to Ovid's Metamorphoses, the handsome youth Narcissus was cursed by the gods to fall in love with his own reflection in a pool of water. Unable to tear himself away, he wasted away and died, and in his place, the first Narcissus flower bloomed. This myth gave the flower a deeply complex and somewhat dangerous character. Its scent is famously intoxicating, sweet, heavy, and almost narcotic. For the Romans, the Narcissus wasn't just a flower. It was a symbol of self-destructive obsession and the perilous allure of vanity. A perfumer would have used this cultural understanding very carefully. A perfume featuring Narcissus might be marketed as dangerously seductive, a scent for those who wish to captivate others completely, but with the implicit understanding that such power came with a risk. Wearing it was a bold statement, an embrace of a fragrance that was as beautiful as it was potentially destructive, a direct link to one of mythology's most famous tales of transformation and fatal pride. The gods themselves were not just passive symbols. They were active, aromatic beings with their own distinct scent preferences, which were meticulously observed and replicated by their mortal worshippers. The goddess Diana, the virgin huntress, was associated with the crisp, clean, and wild aromas of the forest. Scents of cypress, pine, and the cool fragrance of the moonlit grove were considered sacred to her. Anointing oneself with these scents before a hunt, or while seeking her protection, was a way of aligning one's own spirit with her pure, untamed nature. In stark contrast, the goddess Ceres, the protector of the harvest and fertility, was linked to the warm, comforting, and earthy smells of grain, poppies, and the gentle fragrance of baked bread. Offerings to her and perfumes meant to invoke her favor would lean into these nurturing, wholesome aromas. This divine aromatic map meant that a Roman's choice of scent could be a very specific prayer. Choosing a perfume of myrtle and marjoram, sacred to Venus, was a different spiritual act than selecting one of laurel and bay, which were dedicated to Apollo, the god of prophecy and music. Your personal fragrance could be a daily, intimate form of worship, a way to carry the presence of your chosen deity with you throughout your daily life. This deep interweaving of myth and marketing reached its zenith in the world of the unguentarii. These savvy artisans didn't just name their creations after gods and heroes. They crafted entire olfactory narratives around them. A perfume might be called the girdle of Venus, directly referencing the magical belt of the goddess that made her irresistible. Another might be named the tears of Miha, recalling the tragic figure who was transformed into a myrrh tree, thus linking the perfume to the very origin myth of one of its key ingredients. By giving their blends these resonant, mythological names, the perfumers were providing a story that the customer could buy into. They were selling an experience. To wear the girdle of Venus was to feel imbued with that same divine power of attraction. To anoint oneself with an oil called ambrosia, the food of the gods, was to partake, however symbolically, in the immortality of the divine. This practice turned the act of purchasing perfume into a form of participatory mythology, allowing everyday Romans to literally embody the stories that formed the bedrock of their cultural and religious identity, wrapping themselves in fragrant narratives of love, power, tragedy, and transformation every time they prepared for their day. The vibrant, sophisticated world of Roman perfumery did not simply vanish in a single day with the fall of the empire in the West. Instead, it underwent a profound and complex transformation, fragmenting and flowing into new cultural streams that would preserve its essence while altering its form. As the political and economic structures of the Western Roman Empire crumbled in the 5th century, the intricate global supply chains that brought spikenard from the Himalayas and frankincense from Arabia snapped. The bustling workshops of the unguentarii in cities like Rome and Pompeii fell silent, their glass laginoi and marble mortars buried under the dust of a new, more uncertain age. The art of blending, a craft built on centuries of accumulated, secretive knowledge, became a victim of this great unraveling. Without the stable, wealthy patronage of the senatorial class and the state-sponsored demand for temple incense, the economic ecosystem that supported master perfumers collapsed. The knowledge that had been passed from father to son, from master to apprentice, in a continuous, unbroken line for generations, now faced extinction, its secrets dying with the last practitioners who had no one left to teach. Yet, even as this darkness fell over the West, a brilliant light was kept burning in the East, in the enduring Empire of Byzantium. With its capital at Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire not only survived the fall of Rome, but thrived for another 1,000 years, acting as a direct and living repository of classical knowledge, including the art of perfumery. The Byzantine emperors and their courts maintained the lavish Roman traditions of scent, considering it a non-negotiable component of imperial majesty and Orthodox Christian worship. Here, the use of incense in church liturgy became a direct continuation of its role in the Roman temple, the fragrant smoke still symbolizing prayers ascending to heaven, now in the name of the Christian God. Byzantine perfumers, the direct heirs of the Roman unguentarii, continued to work with the precious resins of the East, their trade routes now protected by Byzantine naval power in the Mediterranean. They preserved and even refined the technical manuscripts, ensuring that recipes and methods that were lost forever in Europe continued to be studied and practiced in the great cities of the East, creating an unbroken bridge between the classical world and the medieval one. Perhaps the most significant chapter in the preservation and evolution of this ancient art was written by the rising Islamic civilizations. As the new religion spread rapidly across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Spain in the 7th and 8th centuries, it encountered and enthusiastically absorbed the advanced scientific and artistic traditions of the conquered lands, including the sophisticated perfumery of the Byzantines and Persians. Islamic scholars and chemists, most notably the Persian polymath Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber, revolutionized the field. They perfected the process of distillation, a technique the Romans were aware of but used primarily for simple waters, not for extracting the pure essence of plants. Using an alembic still, Islamic alchemists could now capture the true spirit of a rose or a spice in the form of what we now call essential oil, a substance far more potent and concentrated than any infused oil the Romans could have produced. This was a quantum leap in perfumery. Where a Roman unguent was a blend of fats and oils holding the scent of plants, the Islamic artisans could now work with the pure aromatic soul of the material itself, allowing for fragrances of previously unimaginable complexity, clarity, and strength. This Islamic golden age of perfume did not just preserve Roman knowledge, it fundamentally transcended it. The city of Baghdad became a new global center for the perfume trade, a successor to ancient Rome. Treatises on perfumery were written, detailing hundreds of new recipes and refining extraction techniques. The use of alcohol as a solvent, another Islamic innovation, led to the creation of the first true alcohols-based perfumes, precursors to the eau de cologne we know today. This new technology spread along Islamic trade routes, from the spice markets of the Indian Ocean to the perfumeries of Moorish Spain, in cities like Cordoba. Here in Al-Andalus, the classical knowledge preserved by the Byzantines was recombined with the groundbreaking innovations of the Islamic world, and then slowly seeped back into a Europe that was just beginning to emerge from its dark ages. The Crusades, beginning in the 11th century, though devastatingly violent, ironically accelerated this cultural transfer. European knights who had experienced the sophisticated scents and bathing culture of the Middle East returned home with a newfound desire for these luxuries, bringing back both the materials and the knowledge that would eventually reignite a European perfume industry, first in monasteries, and then in the emerging trading cities like Venice and Grasse. So, what was ultimately lost in this great transition? The greatest casualty was likely the specific, nuanced taste of Rome itself, the particular preference for those heavy, earthy, and wine-infused blends based on olive oil. The Roman olfactory palate, with its love for the animalic depth of spikenard, the bitter complexity of myrrh, and the spicy punch of saffron, was a product of its specific time and place. As the globalized Roman economy collapsed, so too did the availability of its most exotic ingredients. The specific formula for a celebrated Roman perfume, like the legendary regale unguentarum used by emperors, with its precise ratios and its proprietary sequence of infusions, died with the last master who knew it. The names of many of the mystery ingredients we discussed, like aspalathos or the true nature of metopion, faded from memory, becoming permanent enigmas. While the techniques of perfumery survived and even advanced, the specific cultural and aesthetic context that gave rise to the Roman scent was gone, replaced by new preferences, new ingredients, and new technologies that, while magnificent in their own right, created an unbridgeable gap between our modern understanding and the actual experience of smelling the ancient world. The story of Roman perfume's decline is not one of simple death, but of a phoenix-like transformation, its ashes scattering to the winds, only to take root and bloom again in gardens its original creators could never have imagined. This quest to resurrect the lost aromas of Rome is now being pursued in a fascinating collaboration between university laboratories and the world of artisan perfumery. It's a field where historical scholarship meets cutting-edge chemistry, and the process begins not with a sniff, but with a scan. Researchers take those ancient recipes from Pliny and Dioscorides and feed them into databases, cross-referencing every obscure ingredient name with archaeological finds of seeds, pollen, and plant remains. This helps them build a probable list of raw materials. But the real breakthrough comes from analyzing the chemical residues found inside those 2,000-year-old perfume bottles. Using gas chromatography mass spectrometry, scientists can separate and identify the individual molecules left behind, creating a chemical fingerprint of the original scent. It's like finding a ghost's signature. They might detect the specific terpenes from pine resin, the signature compounds of myrrh, or the unmistakable chemical profile of rose oxide. This molecular evidence acts as a reality check against the historical texts, confirming what was actually used versus what was merely written about. Yet, even with this high-tech roadmap, the journey to a convincing reconstruction is filled with daunting obstacles. The single greatest challenge remains the ambiguity of those ancient recipes. An instruction to add 1 part of myrrh is almost meaningless without knowing the resin's quality, its age, or the specific species of the commiphora tree it came from. Modern myrrh can vary wildly in scent depending on its source. So, perfumers involved in these projects often have to make a series of educated guesses. They'll create multiple versions of the same recipe, one with a more bitter myrrh from Somalia, another with a sweeter variety from Ethiopia, and then compare the resulting scents to the chemical data from the archaeological samples. It's a slow, iterative process of trial and error, a dialogue across centuries where success is measured in molecular matches. Furthermore, the base oils present a huge variable. Recreating a scent with modern, refined olive oil will yield a completely different result than using a traditionally pressed, unfiltered oil, which has its own strong, grassy character that would have fundamentally shaped the ancient fragrance. One of the most surprising discoveries from these experiments has been the Romans' sophisticated use of what perfumers call fixatives, materials that slow down evaporation and make the scent last longer. Modern analysis has consistently shown high levels of pine and cedar resin in perfume residues. At first, historians assumed these were simply cheap fillers used to bulk out expensive oils. But when perfumers began incorporating them into their reconstructions, they realized these resins played a crucial artistic role. They act as a deep, smoky, balsamic foundation, a base note that anchors the more volatile fragrances of flowers and spices, allowing the scent to unfold gradually over hours. The Romans, it seems, understood perfumery structure intuitively. They weren't just throwing ingredients together. They were building a pyramid of scent with a bright, attention-grabbing top, a floral or spicy heart, and a long-lasting, resinous base. This reveals a level of technical artistry that the written texts alone never fully conveyed. The sensory experience of smelling these reconstructions for the first time is often described as a shock. Our modern noses, accustomed to light, sweet, or clean fragrances, are not prepared for the power and complexity of a true Roman unguent. A reconstructed blend based on spikenard and myrrh can be overwhelmingly earthy, musky, and medicinal. It doesn't whisper, it announces itself with a profound, almost feral intensity. This has been a humbling lesson for modern perfumers. It forces a re-evaluation of our own aesthetic biases. We tend to value fragrances that are immediately pretty. The Romans valued scents that were potent, persistent, and intellectually complex. Smelling a successful reconstruction is like hearing a piece of music composed in a forgotten scale. It's beautiful, but in a way that is fundamentally foreign to our senses. It doesn't smell like history as we imagine it. It smells like a different world. These projects have also led to a greater appreciation for the unguentarii as a practical chemist. For example, experiments recreating the smothering in roses method described in some texts have revealed its sheer impracticality. Simply piling petals into oil results in a sludgy, moldy mess. However, when researchers followed the method of layering petals with salt, the results were remarkable. The salt drew out the moisture efficiently, preserving the floral essence without rot, and the resulting salted petals produced a far more intense and stable rose oil when finally infused. This simple test validated a preservation technique that the written sources mention only in passing, proving that the Roman perfumers' knowledge was often held in their hands and their practices, not just in their written formulas. Each successful reconstruction, therefore, does more than just recreate a smell. It helps to recover a piece of lost human ingenuity, giving voice to the silent, skilled work of the ancient artisans, who once knew how to capture the very breath of their world in a glass bottle. In the bustling forum or at a crowded banquet, a Roman elite never simply announced his political leanings with a loud speech or a bold banner. Instead, he wielded a far more subtle and pervasive tool, the specific fragrance that clung to his skin and trailed in his wake. This was a silent, aromatic language understood by everyone in his social sphere. A complex vocabulary of scent that communicated status, affiliation, and intention without a single word being spoken. To be sophisticated in ancient Rome was to be fluent in this olfactory dialect. To know that the choice between a rose-based unguent and one heavy with spikenard was as loaded with meaning as a modern political slogan. The very air was thick with unspoken declarations, and your personal aroma was your most intimate and constant form of social advertising. Consider the powerful statement made by a scent leaning heavily on frankincense and laurel. These were the aromas of the state, of military triumph, and of unwavering loyalty to the traditional Roman ideals of piety and authority. Frankincense, with its clean, citrus-tinged smoke, was the scent of the state religion, burned on every major altar. Laurel was sacred to Apollo, and was woven into the crowns bestowed upon triumphant generals. A senator anointing himself with a blend featuring these notes was making a very public affirmation of his pietas, his devotion to the gods and the established order. He was signaling that he was a safe pair of hands, a man of tradition and gravity. Conversely, a younger, more ambitious politician might deliberately choose a more exotic and controversial fragrance. If he opted for a blend dominated by the musky, animalic richness of pure spikenard, he was broadcasting something entirely different. He was stating that he had connections to the lucrative Eastern trade, that he embraced the new cosmopolitan influences flowing into Rome from the conquered Hellenistic East, and that he perhaps saw himself as a man of the future, not the past. His scent was a calculated risk, meant to attract a faction that valued worldly sophistication over old-fashioned Roman austerity. This fragrant signaling extended powerfully into the delicate and highly strategic world of romance and social climbing. The realm of amorous pursuit was governed by a set of unwritten aromatic rules as complex as any legal code. For a man seeking to convey serious, marriageable intentions toward a woman from a respectable family, the chosen scent would be one of dignified floralcy. A sophisticated blend of rose, perhaps lightened with a touch of violet, was the equivalent of a formal courtship proposal. Rose, sacred to Venus, was acceptable, but its presentation was key. It had to be refined, not overly sensual. It spoke of devotion, prosperity, and the intention to establish a legitimate household. However, if a man's interests were less honorable and more directly sensual, his aromatic vocabulary shifted dramatically. He might choose a fragrance centered on the narcotic, heavy sweetness of the narcissus flower. Remember, the narcissus was linked to the myth of self-destructive obsession. Wearing this scent was a bold, almost dangerous declaration of raw desire, a signal that he was interested in a passionate, and likely fleeting, liaison rather than a respectable alliance. It was the scent of the seducer, not the suitor. Women, too, wielded this power with immense skill, using scent to navigate a society that offered them limited direct political agency. A matron from an old, powerful family would likely favor a blend based on myrtle and quince. Myrtle was another plant sacred to Venus, but in a more domestic, wifely aspect, associated with fidelity and marital love. Quince had a fresh, astringent, and slightly sweet aroma, and was believed to be an aphrodisiac. Together they created a fragrance that proudly announced, respectable but alluring. A perfect balance for a woman who needed to maintain her public dignity while keeping her husband's attention. For a courtesan or a freedwoman seeking the patronage of a powerful man, the scent strategy was entirely different. She would embrace the most expensive and unmistakably exotic aromas she could afford. A perfume featuring not just rose, but the costliest spikenard, a hint of cinnamon, and the deep warmth of labdanum would be her weapon of choice. This was a scent that screamed of access to luxury and a rejection of provincial tastes. It was designed to make her stand out in a crowd, to mark her as someone who understood the very pinnacle of pleasure, and could offer a man an escape from the staid expectations of his class. The ultimate demonstration of this scented power play, however, was the act of scenting not just oneself, but an entire space to make a statement that was simply inescapable. When a politician hosted a banquet, the aroma that greeted his guests at the door was a carefully crafted extension of his own personal brand. If he wanted to project an image of untouchable, traditional authority, the halls might be suffused with the solemn, sacred smoke of frankincense, making attendees feel as if they were entering a temple. But if his goal was to dazzle and overwhelm, to showcase his incredible wealth and sway, he might deploy the ultimate aromatic flex, saffron. Servants would sprinkle saffron-infused water on the hot floors, and as guests walked through, the heat from their feet would release the spice's incredibly expensive, honey-like and slightly medicinal perfume into the air. The scent of saffron was so powerfully linked to opulence and celebration that its use in a private home was a brazen display of financial muscle. Every breath his guests took was a reminder of their host's boundless resources, a sensory argument for his influence that was far more persuasive than any after-dinner speech could ever be. In the end, to be Roman was to live in a world where your identity was not just seen and heard, but persistently, personally, and powerfully smelled. While the Roman world was filled with breathtaking aromas, this sensory luxury came at a significant and often hidden environmental cost. We've talked about the sprawling global supply chains that brought precious ingredients to Rome, but we haven't yet considered the ecological footprint left by harvesting those materials on an industrial scale. The Roman appetite for scent was not sustainable. It placed immense pressure on specific ecosystems, leading to localized deforestation, the transformation of agricultural landscapes, and what we might today recognize as some of the earliest examples of industrial-scale monocropping, all in the pursuit of fragrant perfection. One of the most direct impacts was on forests, particularly those containing cedar and citron trees. Cedarwood oil was a superstar in the perfumer's workshop, prized as a powerful fixative that made lighter floral scents last longer and valued for its own sharp, clean, balsamic aroma. But obtaining it was a destructive process. The primary source for the finest cedarwood was the Atlas Mountains in North Africa, a region that was once lush with vast forests of Atlas cedar. To harvest the oil, Roman loggers wouldn't just tap the trees. They would often cut down mature cedars to access the heartwood, where the richest aromatic resins were concentrated. The scale of this harvesting, driven by relentless demand from perfumeries, shipbuilders, and construction, contributed significantly to the deforestation of North Africa. Over centuries, this loss of tree cover led to soil erosion, the silting up of rivers, and a gradual alteration of the local climate. The fragrant legacy of Rome, in part, rests on the stripped slopes of mountains whose ecosystems have never fully recovered. This demand for wood wasn't limited to perfume alone, but perfume was a major driver of a luxury market that prioritized immediate gratification over long-term environmental health. Similarly, the sandalwood tree, another source of precious fragrant heartwood, faced intense pressure. While most sandalwood was imported from India, its popularity in Roman blends meant that its harvest was also likely conducted without any thought of replanting or sustainable management. The ancient world operated on a principle of seemingly limitless resources, but the concentrated Roman demand for specific, slow-growing trees revealed the fragility of that assumption. The scent of cedar that once graced a patrician's wrist was in effect the ghost of a fallen forest, a direct link between personal luxury and ecological change on a continental scale. The environmental transformation wasn't confined to wild forests. It also reshaped farmland in dramatic ways. To satisfy the colossal demand for flowers, especially roses, Roman agriculturists pioneered what can only be called flower factories. The city of Paestum, famous for its twice-blooming roses, became the center of an agricultural revolution. Vast estates were dedicated solely to rose cultivation, transforming the landscape into a sea of blossoms each spring. This was not small-scale, diversified farming. It was an early form of monocropping, where a single high-value crop is grown on the same land year after year. While this was brilliant from an economic standpoint, it was demanding on the environment. Rose bushes are nutrient-hungry. Growing them intensively on such a scale would have depleted the soil of essential minerals, requiring constant fertilization. Roman writers like Columella detail the use of manure, compost, and even ashes to keep the soil productive. But the relentless cycle of planting and harvesting would have gradually degraded the land, making it dependent on human intervention to remain fertile. The water requirements for this floral industry were equally immense. Roses need a consistent and plentiful water supply, especially in the warm Mediterranean climate of southern Italy. To irrigate these sprawling rose fields, Roman engineers would have constructed sophisticated systems of aqueducts, channels, and water-lifting devices, diverting water from local rivers and springs. This large-scale diversion of water for commercial flower farming would have had downstream consequences, potentially reducing water availability for other farmers growing essential food crops, or altering local wetland habitats. The incredible sight and scent of those Paestum rose fields were a testament to Roman agricultural engineering. But they also represented a significant reallocation of natural resources channeling water and land away from subsistence and toward the production of luxury goods for the elite. The beautiful, intoxicating aroma of a Roman rose unguent was, in a very real sense, a concentration of vast amounts of water, labor, and land. This industrial approach extended to other popular flowers, like violets and lilies, which were also grown in dedicated market gardens on the outskirts of major cities. The need for a consistent, reliable supply of fresh petals for the perfumers of Rome and Pompeii created a new class of commercial flower farmers. These agricultural specialists understood forced growth, crop rotation, and how to maximize yield, but their success came at the cost of biodiversity. Where there might once have been a patchwork of different crops, wild grasses, and native flowers, there were now orderly, monotonous rows of violets. This shift reduced habitat for local insects, birds, and other wildlife, creating a simplified ecological zone dedicated to feeding the Roman desire for fragrance. The very practices that made the mass production of perfume possible were, in their own way, quietly simplifying and straining the natural world. The environmental cost of Roman perfume is a story woven into the very soil and the vanished forests, a reminder that even the most beautiful and artistic human creations can leave a lasting mark on the planet. If you really want to understand the intimate, daily role that scent played in the life of a Roman aristocrat, you have to look beyond the archaeological finds and the historical encyclopedias and step into the vibrant, witty, and often scandalous world of Roman poetry. It is here, in the clever verses of masters like Ovid and Martial, that we find scent not as a list of ingredients, but as a living, breathing character in the drama of Roman social life. These poets were brilliant social observers, and they used references to perfumes and unguents as a kind of literary shorthand, a way to instantly convey a person's character, their social ambitions, and even their moral failings. Through their eyes, we see that a Roman's choice of fragrance was never just a personal preference. It was a public performance, and everyone in the audience was a critic. Ovid, the great poet of love and seduction, treats scented oil as an essential piece of a lover's tactical equipment. In his famous instructional poem, The Art of Love, he offers very specific advice to both men and women on how to use fragrance to attract a partner. His guidance is remarkably practical. He tells men to make sure their skin is tanned from exercise, but to be well groomed and to use a scent that is simple. He warns against overwhelming a potential lover with a perfume that is too heavy or effeminate. For women, however, his advice is far more elaborate. He encourages them to learn the arts of makeup and to use luxurious, alluring perfumes. But then, in a moment of pure Ovidian wit, he issues a crucial warning. He advises women to apply their scent in private, away from male eyes. Why? Because the process of anointing, he suggests, is messy and ungraceful. The true magic of the perfume should be in its effect, not in the sight of the labor required to create it. This single piece of advice opens a fascinating window into the gendered world of Roman scent. For men, fragrance was about enhancing a natural, athletic masculinity. For women, it was part of a crafted artifice, a secret art meant to create an illusion of effortless beauty and divine allure. Ovid isn't just describing perfume. He's giving us a playbook for social climbing and romantic conquest, where the right scent, applied with the right discretion, could be the key to winning affection. Where Ovid gives us the theory of scent as a tool for seduction, the epigrammatist Martial gives us the brutal, hilarious, and often cynical reality. His short, punchy poems are like snapshots of daily life in Rome, and he uses the language of perfume to skewer the pretensions and vices of his contemporaries. In one of his most famous epigrams, he attacks a man named Posthumus for his overpowering and disgusting breath. He lists a series of progressively worse smells: the breath of a goat, the stench of a chicken coop, and then delivers the final, crushing blow. It's worse than the breath of a man who has just kissed his mistress's perfume-scented hair. This is a brilliant, inverted compliment. The mistress is so lavishly perfumed that even the act of kissing her hair leaves a cloying, nauseating residue. Martial isn't criticizing the perfume itself, but the excessive, unthinking application of it. He exposes the fine line the Romans walked between sophistication and vulgarity. A light, well-chosen scent was the mark of a refined person. A heavy, overwhelming cloud of fragrance was the sign of a social climber who was trying too hard. Martial's poetry is also a treasure trove of specific scent names and their social meanings. He doesn't just say he wore perfume. He names names. He mentions cinnaim, a cinnamon-scented unguent, and foliatum, a perfume made from the leaves of the myrtle tree. But his most telling references are to the super-elite, imported fragrances. He writes with biting sarcasm about a man who bankrupts himself to buy the most expensive Arabian perfumes, all to impress a lover who is ultimately unfaithful. In another poem, he contrasts the simple, honest smell of a Roman farm with the decadent, imported scents of the city. Through Martial, we learn that the choice of a specific, name-brand perfume was a direct reflection of your financial status and your cultural allegiance. Wearing a cheap, local myrtle oil marked you as a traditionalist or someone of modest means, but splurging on a famed Arabian blend was a risky move. It could signal immense wealth and worldliness, or it could, as Martial so often points out, reveal you as a fool who prioritizes aromatic display over genuine substance. His poems are a constant reminder that in Rome your scent was always being judged, and the critics were merciless. Beyond the tactics of love and the cut and thrust of social satire, poets also used scent to explore deeper, more philosophical themes, most notably the idea of memento mori, the remembrance of death. The rose, that ultimate symbol of Roman luxury, also carried this dark, double edge. The poet Horace, in one of his odes, famously urges a character named Lucano not to seek to know the future, but to seize the day, to trust in the future as little as possible. While we speak, he writes, envious time will have fled, seize the day, trusting as little as possible in the next day. This philosophy of carpe diem is often illustrated with the image of a rose. The rose is breathtakingly beautiful, but it withers with shocking speed. Its fleeting nature was a constant, fragrant reminder that life's pleasures are transient, and that death comes for everyone, no matter how rich or powerful. To anoint yourself with rose perfume was therefore a deeply complex act. You were adorning yourself with the ultimate symbol of beauty and love, while simultaneously wearing a reminder of your own mortality. This gives the Roman obsession with scent a profound, almost tragic depth. It wasn't just about vanity. It was about a conscious, desperate attempt to grasp at beauty in the full, sobering knowledge of its inevitable decay. This literary evidence, when pieced together, does more than just confirm that Romans liked perfume. It allows us to reconstruct the unspoken social rules that governed its use. The poets show us that there was a whole etiquette of scent, an invisible code of conduct. They teach us that applying too much perfume was as much a social faux pas as wearing the wrong color toga. They reveal that certain scents were considered appropriate for men and others for women, and that blurring those lines could lead to gossip and ridicule. Most importantly, they illustrate that scent was a powerful narrative device. For Ovid, a perfume bottle on a dressing table could tell a story of secret preparation and hopeful seduction. For Martial, the overpowering smell of a man's unguent could tell the story of his financial desperation and social insecurity. For Horace, the scent of a rose could evoke an entire philosophy of life and death. In their deft hands, the simple act of anointing oneself becomes a rich, multi-layered story, allowing us to smell the world of ancient Rome not as a collection of ancient ingredients, but through the passions, anxieties, and sharp-eyed observations of the people who actually lived in it. Despite our best efforts to reconstruct their world, the true, complete scentscape of ancient Rome will always have profound and permanent gaps. Even with our advanced chemistry and dedicated research, entire chapters of the unguentarius's craft have been irrevocably erased by time, leaving behind ghostly outlines of knowledge we can never fully reclaim. The greatest of these losses is the precise, living artistry of the blend itself. We can identify the ingredients from chemical residues, and we can translate the measurements from ancient texts, but we cannot recover the master's touch, the intuitive judgment calls made in a single moment that separated a good perfume from a legendary one. A modern perfumer can follow a recipe for a classic French perfume with perfect precision, because the standards and the raw materials are consistent. The Roman unguentarius had no such stability. His craft was one of constant sensory adjustment. He would taste a batch of rose petals to gauge their pungency, smell a new shipment of myrrh resin to judge its bitterness, and adjust his formula on the fly based on the unique character of his materials that season. This lived sensory wisdom died with each master, leaving us with a chemical list, but not the symphony it was meant to create. The culture of secrecy that surrounded these artisans, while protecting their commercial advantage, ultimately served as a vault from which the keys were thrown away. These were family trades, and a father might only pass his most prized formula to a son on his deathbed. If that son died young in an epidemic, or if the family line was broken by war or economic collapse, generations of accumulated knowledge vanished in an instant. There were no central guild libraries or public records safeguarding these formulas. They existed as memories, whispered instructions, and perhaps a few cryptic notes on a wax tablet that crumbled to dust. This means that the most exclusive, celebrated scents, the ones commissioned by emperors, or blended for a single, triumphant general's parade, were the most vulnerable. They were known to so few that their disappearance was total. We can guess at their grandeur from literary references, but their specific aromatic profiles are gone forever, lost not in a dramatic fire or a volcanic eruption, but in the quiet, mundane tragedy of a single human death. Perhaps the most haunting mysteries revolve around the ingredients we can no longer positively identify. We've discussed aspalathos and metopion, but they represent a much larger group of botanical phantoms. Ancient texts mention substances like costos, described as a fragrant root, but its precise botanical identity is still debated. Was it the same costus root we know today, with its controversial animalic scent, or was it something else entirely? Furthermore, our understanding is skewed by what survived. The literary record is dominated by elite male writers like Pliny, who documented the scents of the powerful and the expensive. But what of the everyday perfumes used by the common people of Rome? What simple local herbs and flowers did the average farmer's wife use to scent her home or her skin? These humble blends, created from hedgerow plants and common oils, left no chemical trace in expensive glass bottles, and were deemed unworthy of documentation by contemporary scholars. The olfactory world of the Roman masses, the true scent of the street, is a silence even deeper than the lost imperial fragrances. We are also left to wonder about the sheer breadth of their aromatic failures. History, by its nature, records successes. We read about the legendary blends that were worth a fortune. But what about the experiments that went terribly wrong? The combinations that smelled foul, the infusions that spoiled, the attempts to create a new scent that resulted in a laughable disaster. These trials and errors were a vital part of the learning process for every apprentice, yet they are completely invisible to us. We see the polished, final product of their art, but we miss the messy, human journey of discovery that led to it. The lost knowledge isn't just about what worked. It's about the vast landscape of what didn't. A map of creative dead ends that shaped the evolution of their craft, just as much as their triumphs did. This inherent limitation forces us to confront a humbling truth about our connection to the past. We can analyze molecules and translate texts, but we cannot experience the ancient world with an ancient nose. Our own olfactory preferences and cultural biases are a filter we can never completely remove. A modern person might find the heavy, resinous, and animalic character of a reconstructed Roman perfume to be challenging or even unpleasant. But to a Roman noble, that same scent was the epitome of luxury, sophistication, and divine connection. The very definition of what smelled good was culturally constructed, and that construction is something we can study but never truly inhabit. The final unbridgeable gap is not one of fact, but of feeling. We will never know the visceral thrill a Roman felt when catching the scent of a specific, now lost blend on the evening air, a scent that evoked memories, signaled status, and connected them to their world in a way that our analytical reconstructions can only hint at. The deepest mystery of Roman scent, then, is not just the list of ingredients we have lost, but the human experience of smelling them, an intimate and emotional dimension of their lives that has evaporated as completely as the most volatile top note from an unsealed bottle. And so, as our journey through the aromatic world of ancient Rome comes to a close, we are left with a profound sense of awe for a civilization whose mastery of scent was nothing short of revolutionary. This was far more than a simple quest for pleasant smells. It was a deeply sophisticated art form that wove together an advanced understanding of chemistry, a global network of botany, and a nuanced appreciation for the power of sensory experience. The Roman unguentarius was not merely a mixer of oils. He was an alchemist, a global trader, a therapist, and a priest, all at once. He manipulated base oils and rare botanicals with the precision of a laboratory scientist, intuitively understanding preservation, extraction, and the molecular structure of fragrance long before these concepts had formal name. His workshop was a crossroads of the known world, where ingredients from the Himalayan foothills met resins from the Arabian desert and flowers from the Italian countryside, all brought together to create something greater than the sum of its parts, a bottled essence of the empire itself. What this lost art reveals is a people who were profoundly in tune with their environment and their own senses in a way that can feel startlingly modern. They recognized that scent was a direct line to memory, emotion, and identity. They engineered their perfumes not just for fleeting pleasure, but for longevity, layering bright top notes over rich heart notes and deep, resinous base notes to create a fragrance that unfolded over hours, telling a story on the skin. They saw the direct connection between olfactory pleasure and physical well-being, blending their unguents with medicinal intent believing that a scent could calm a troubled mind, ease a headache, or restore a sense of balance. Their entire culture was built around this holistic understanding that a scent could define a sacred space, signal a political allegiance, commemorate a life, or simply make the business of being human a more beautiful and engaging experience. In their relentless pursuit of the perfect aroma, they demonstrated a holistic intelligence that connected commerce to culture, science to spirituality, and the personal to the political. Now, as you move through your own day, take a moment to consider the scents that shape your world. Notice how the aroma of fresh coffee can energize your morning, or how the smell of rain on pavement can evoke a specific, poignant memory. Think about the fragrances you choose to wear or bring into your home, and what silent messages they might be sending. In many ways, we are still participating in the same ancient human ritual, using scent to curate our identity and connect with our surroundings. The legacy of the Roman unguentarii lives on in every perfumer who painstakingly crafts a new blend, in every scientist who analyzes the chemistry of aroma, and in every one of us who understands that a smell can be a powerful, invisible thread connecting us to our past and to each other. The air around us is still filled with stories, just waiting for a curious nose to discover them. We would love to hear which part of this fragrant history resonated most with you. Did the story of the global spice trade surprise you? Or were you drawn to the idea of scent as a form of ancient medicine? Share your thoughts and any questions you have in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation.